Welcome back, guys. Really excited to do this episode. We have Steve Stewart-Williams on the show. You guys understand we talk a lot about evolutionary psychology on this show. And one of the difficulties that people have is explaining sex differences without people getting offended, or trying to explain sex differences without there being any misunderstanding. Several months ago, I heard that Steve Stewart-Williams was writing another book, A Billion Years of Sex Differences. It's not even available in the United States right now, so I actually went and got a copy in the UK, and I'm excited to have him on here. He is a professor of psychology at Nottingham Malaysia's campus. He has a Substack called Nature, Nurture, Nietzsche. He's the author of Darwin, God and the Meaning of Life, The Ape That Understood the Universe, and his brand new book, A Billion Years of Sex Differences. Please welcome Steve Stewart-Williams. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Michael. How are you?
Incredible.
Great
First
to
off,
be on the show.
yeah, I appreciate it. First off, a couple of months ago, I did this tweet. I don't know if you saw it, where I went over the fact that there's probably fewer than 50 evolutionary psychology books, not textbooks, that are available to there. I had 26, and then I forgot the Robin Wright book, so Robin Dunbar, and so it ended up being about 30. When we looked at like positive psychology, when we looked at behavioral psychology, it was in the 3,000s of the books that were available, but fewer than 50 on evolutionary psychology. David Buss just recently went on trigonometry, and the name of the episode was titled "Nobody Wants to Hear This." And I'm just curious, why does this field that it just, in my opinion, is one of the most testable and falsifiable and scrutinized forms of psychology, why is it feels like it's the most underrated player in the league? Why do you think that is?
Yes, it's a tricky question. I agree that some folks don't seem to want to hear it. It is interesting. Some people just absolutely love it, but some people are not so keen. It's a little bit, it's like Marmite. Do you know what I mean? Do you have
No.
Marmite in the United States? It's this, it's a spread for toast, which is very popular in New Zealand and Australia. But it's famously, some people love it, some people hate it. And that seems to be the case for evolutionary psychology as well. So why is it that some people really don't like it? I think probably a few things. I think that people seem to dislike genetic explanations in general. So I think another field that is also very, very accomplished and is really onto something, but which people don't like, is the field of behavior genetics, which looks at the nature and nurture of individual differences. And in both cases, with evolutionary psychology, with behavior genetics, because it's talking about the involvement of genes and evolution, people get the message that I think that it means that maybe things can't change. We're stuck with the way we are. There's little flexibility in terms of how we can be. Now, I think the fact that even if that were true, even if we're stuck with the way things are, that wouldn't imply that these fields are false. But I do think that we do have more flexibility than people sometimes worry that these fields imply. So I think that's one thing. I think another thing with evolutionary psychology specifically that people worry about is that they don't like the sex differences in particular. So if we're stuck with, our tribalism, if we're stuck with our propensity for aggression, that's one thing. But if we're stuck with sex differences, then that sort of would seem to undermine some of the goals that people have for society and making things perfectly equal. I think that's coupled with the fact that we have a long history of anti-female sexism, and specifically even in science, there's a long history of anti-female sexism, especially in the early days of science and the science of anthropology and psychology. So I think it makes people wary that maybe if we open the door to talking about evolved sex differences, maybe we're going to go down the path of saying, basically, what they're worried about, I think, is people arguing that women are inferior to men.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I loved in your book is at the very beginning, or near the beginning of the book, is when you started talking about sex difference traditionalism and sex difference progressivism. And I had this discussion with Dr. Buss also, where we talked about the idea that this is just in the United States. I don't know if it's the same thing in Australia or where you are in Malaysia now, but the conservatives in this country a lot of times don't like the idea of evolutionary psychology because they don't believe in evolution. And a lot of times the progressives in this country do not like the idea of evolutionary psychology because they don't like the idea of defined previous gender roles. It doesn't mean they have to be gender roles today. So it ends up in this little narrow orphaned field of psychology that ironically, not to be arrogant here, I feel is the most true. I really feel like there's more testable, provable hypothesis in evolutionary psychology than there is in all of behavioral psychology. And so because of, or social psychology, you say everyone understands sex differences except for social scientists, right?
Yeah.
And so I suppose that might be the reason why. And I think your explanation of traditionalists and progressives is probably the best explanation.
Yeah, the field does seem to get it in the neck from both extremes on the political distribution. And I think particularly in the US, I think the anti-evolution side of things is particularly strong among the conservatives and right-wing people. I think maybe less so, for instance, in the UK, where people are more at ease with evolution. But yeah,
Well, they
it is
teach
quite a big
evolution in
deal.
high school there. You understand there's
Well,
states in
exactly.
this country, we don't
Yeah.
even teach natural selection.
No, exactly. It's
Yeah.
amazing, right? So I think so a lot of conservatives are more at ease with the sex differences, or at least how they perceive them. I think they probably think that, like a lot of folks, a lot of conservatives might think that evolutionary psychology is just sort of rubber stamping all the traditional sex roles, by just putting an evolutionary spin. And they're not interested in the evolutionary spin, but they just think that it's sort of rubber stamping the differences as they perceive them. And possibly they're right about that in some cases, but I think that they, just as progressives might have a tendency to kind of minimize and deny sex differences, I think that some conservatives have a tendency to do the reverse and to exaggerate the magnitude of the differences, and also to moralize them. So to say,
Yes.
not only is this the way things are, but also it's the way that things should be.
Should be. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a mistake as
Exactly.
well. That's a mistake known as the naturalistic fallacy, where you assume that what is natural is therefore good.
So the nature versus nurture argument that you hear constantly, this is just my opinion from reading your books and Dr. Buss and Jeffrey Miller and reading Robert Trivers and all these other individuals, Marty Hazelton, is that the impression I get is that it is nature and nurture, but it seems to be more nature than we want to admit, first off, and then secondarily, like maybe 60 to 80% nature, depending on what it is. If it's your height, then it's probably more than that. And if it's your proclivity to like vanilla ice cream, then it's probably less than that. But what I'm curious with is the idea of the person who comes and says, no, these beliefs that boys are more aggressive and more assertive and they grow up to be more rambunctious or whatever, more likely to get into accidents. And these things are sociocultural. And what is your argument against the idea that most of these differences are sociocultural?
Well, I've got a bunch. Basically, I think there are various lines of evidence that point in the direction of suggesting that there's a contribution of nature as well, and that is not just nurture. So I've got 6 lines of evidence that I talk about in the book. So one of them is developmental evidence. So the timing of the onset of sex differences. Some sex differences appear very, very early in the lifespan. Too early, I think, for it to be plausibly attributed to purely to socialization.
Maybe like infants looking at a more attractive face, something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they do tend to do that even within the first few days and months of life. Infants tend to look at faces that are considered attractive to adults, that are rated as attractive to adults.
Yeah.
They haven't seen lots of billboards or adverts or Hollywood movies, so it's sort of hard to attribute that to socialization. And other examples would include aggression. So as soon as kids are mobile enough to be able to engage in aggression, boys do more of it than girls. Risk taking as well, boys immediately do more of it than girls. There's a long list. Play behavior differs right from the start. And so early onset is one line of developmental evidence. Another line is that if a sex difference appears at puberty or enlarges at puberty, that is consistent with an evolutionary explanation as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of sex differences in other animals as well. They appear or enlarge at puberty. And the aggression and risk-taking sex differences, they both enlarge at puberty in our species and other species as well. And various differences in sexuality as well appear at puberty. So that's one line of evidence, developmental. Another line of evidence is that a lot of these sex differences are very, very robust across time. So we find them when psychologists first started measuring them in the early 20th century. They found sex differences in mate preferences, sex differences in career-related interests. They found them back then, and then right across the 20th century into the 21st century, those differences have persisted, even in the face of big social changes over that period. the sexual revolution, all the changes that happened in the 1960s, the feminist revolution and so on, the differences persist. Third line of evidence is that a lot of these sex differences persist even in the face of social pressure in the opposite direction. So a good example here is that boys tend to be more aggressive than girls, even though parents and teachers more often they more often tell off boys than girls for being aggressive. And that's not because they approve more of girls' aggression. That's just because boys are more often aggressive. And so they try to clamp down on that just because there's more of it with the boys. Despite that, though, despite clamping down on male aggression, males are more aggressive in every single culture on Earth. Fourth line of evidence is hormonal evidence. And what we find is various lines of evidence that suggest correlations between prenatal hormonal exposure and later behavior. So, for instance, males and females that are exposed to high levels of testosterone in the womb, they exhibit greater aggression as adults, lower levels of parental involvement. They also, higher testosterone in the womb correlates with more male typical occupational preferences as well.
So I want to skip ahead here because I was actually going to get to this later. I went to my first WNBA game last night because Caitlin Clark was playing here for the Indiana Fever. She actually didn't play in the game, but I wanted to see it. And then I was curious. I was like, because I remember the CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia. We're talking about how you are more likely for these women to also be attracted to women. And so I looked it up. It's like in the WNBA, what percentage of the players there identify as being lesbian. And the number is somewhere that one survey was 30%. One of them was 58%, which is, regardless of what the number is, it's far, far greater than the average. And, the CAH was something that happens for 1 out of every 18,000 children. Well, these are exceptional athletes for women. These are not normal. There's I think the starting center for the Fever was 6'6". Like it was, and these were like for women, these are phenomenal athletes. And so you could see that being one of those instances. But the opposite for CAH, there was a gonado, I forgot what it was, IG something. I forgot what it was. And I'm curious.
Yes, I know the one you mean. Yeah.
I forgot how to say it because inefficient gonadarrhea something, I forgot. But I was curious if the CAH was more likely to make women more attracted to women. Was a lack of prenatal testosterone more likely to make men attracted to men?
Yeah, so it's idiopathic hypogonadotropic hypogonadism is the name, and I always forget that. Exactly, yeah. And I just had to read that off my notes because I can never so many syllables in that I can never remember it. I would make the same prediction as you that would be associated with lower rates of attraction to women. But I'm not aware of any research on that. That's really fascinating about the higher rates of lesbianism. CAH people, women, they also have higher rates of attraction to women in the context of being bisexual.
Yes,
as well. 6'6". That's an interesting height. I'm 6'6" as well.
Yeah,
and I think I've only once ever met a woman who was taller than me. So it's very, very rare. I mean, it's rare enough to meet guys who are taller than me, or as tall, but very rare in women.
So the other thing is, and I think this is something that I experienced, and I've heard several other people say it. I listened to your interview with Chris Williamson. He kind of seems to have the same feeling that I did. You read about evolutionary psychology, and you use the word "it all clicked." That's exactly how I felt. I remember the first time I read The Evolution of Desire, probably two versions ago. And then I went and got one of my clients is on the faculty at Harvard, and he got me Dr. Buss's actual textbook. And I went and read the whole entire, was like $300 textbook. And it's phenomenal. Like there's so much stuff in that textbook that you would never put into a regular copy because it's very like the studies on bullying, men who bully more in high school have more sexual partners. That I don't think should be, that might not need to be in a book somewhere. But there's some really controversial stuff in there. And I remember reading that and just thinking, man, it all clicked into place. And you say, I fell in love on my honeymoon. Were you studying psychology in general then, and then switched over to evolutionary psychology? And also when you were doing that, was the PhD in evolution? Because I remember it's sociobiology and then evolutionary psychology. How did that whole thing work?
So I was doing my undergraduate degree at the time. So I dropped out of university like a year after leaving school because I just wasn't interested in it. And I was just not ready to do that. I actually decided that I wanted to become a musician, like a songwriter.
What's the name
So
of
I
the band
pursued
you're
that for a
playing
few
now?
years.
The
It's the Psychic Armpits.
the Psychic
Which
Armpits. That's
is,
right. Okay.
yeah. So I mentioned that in the preface to the book. It's a funny name for a band. It's based on a
Yeah.
mishearing. It's a long story, but so I wanted to do that. It wasn't realistic. It didn't get anywhere. It was fun, but didn't get anywhere. And I sort of realized towards the end of that I didn't want to be a musician, didn't want to be a rock star. That I'm a nerd rather than a rocker. So I was going to do that instead. I went back to university, studying psychology in general. And then, yes, on my honeymoon, in my second year back at university, got married. My wife and I were traveling around the country, and I brought a book with me, which was Robert Wright's Moral Animal.
Moral Animal.
Like you say.
Yeah.
The Moral Animal. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great book. Excellent book. And yeah, I just fell in love with the field. So yes, I say in the book that I fell in love on my honeymoon, which was a bit awkward. Well, it wasn't really awkward because actually I didn't fall in love with another woman. I just fell in love with evolutionary psychology, but also specifically the evolutionary explanation for sex differences. And yeah, it just totally clicked instantly. It's like, of course, that just suddenly instantly explains a whole bunch of stuff that we all notice and that's important to most people in their lives. Suddenly it makes sense.
I have been a coach, a performance coach for men for the last 18 years. And I'll tell you, when I found out about evolutionary psychology about 11 years ago, I just couldn't believe. I was like, they do studies on this? Really? Like I couldn't. I was baffled. I remember the discussions you'd see on TV shows about who lies more, men or women, or who cheats more. And then it's just an androgynous discussion that goes nowhere. And it's like, no, there's hard data on this. There's actual data. You should look it up, but nobody would look it up. And then, reading Dr. Buss's book, and then, I love Satoshi Kanazawa's book. I've been able to correspond with him, Intelligence Paradox and Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. And then I think Mate is a tremendous book for guys actually trying to learn how to date more. I think it's a really good book by Joffrey Miller. So it clicked into place. What were some of the things that clicked into place for you where it was like, that makes way more sense?
Well, I guess the main one initially was the evolutionary explanation for why, on average, men and male animals in general are more interested in seeking out multiple partners and low-cost sex. And it's basically got to do with sex differences in reproductive physiology and the fact that to make one bouncing baby, a woman has to have a 9-month pregnancy. She has to give birth, and until very recently, she would also have to nurse the young for a couple of years. Whereas, at least in principle, all the guy needs to contribute is the sex act. And now typically in our species, guys invest a lot more than that in offspring, which changes things quite a bit. But in most mammals, the females put all the investment, basically all the investment into the young, and the males do
only
nothing.
About 3% of mammals pair bond. There's about 5,000 species of mammals, and only about 3% of them pair bond. Is that correct?
Yeah. I think 3 to 5%. The estimates are a little cloudy, but somewhere in that ballpark. So we're really actually quite atypical among mammals in that we do form pair bonds. Guys very often do invest in the young. In most other mammals, they don't. Most other mammals, the females put forward, the pregnancy, birth, lactation, and the males they literally just put in the sperm act, the sex act rather. They make a donation of sperm and that's it. They're sperm donors, they're deadbeat dads, and nothing else. And where that's the case, that means that the maximum number of offspring that males can have is much higher than the maximum number that females can have. Because in principle, a male mammal could mate with multiple females and have offspring from multiple females. Whereas if a female was to mate with multiple males, probably she's going to have no more offspring than she would if she just mated with one male. So because of that, you get strong selection on the males for traits that will mean that they're among the lucky few that have tons and tons of offspring, as opposed to the unlucky many who have very few offspring or no offspring at all. And that includes traits like a strong desire for multiple mates. So that explains that just straight up. But also a tendency to to be aggressive with other males in terms of jockeying for status and trying to get resources or trying to get territory, depending on the species, or tendency to try to show off for females. So it's peacocks, classic example, peacocks will fan out their colorful ornamental tails to try to seduce the peahens, the females of that species. And you get selection for that as well. Much stronger selection for all those kind of traits in males than in females. Now you do get that in humans as well to some degree. Like I say though, because we invest in the young commonly, it kind of reduces the size of the gap in the maximum offspring number for males versus females. Brings it down. As that happens, it brings down the average magnitude of the sex differences. But still, we do still have a higher maximum offspring number for males than females. Males do typically invest less in offspring than females do. And so we do have the usual cluster of sex differences that we find in other mammals. It is somewhat muted, but they are still there.
I haven't heard you discuss this, but this was the one part of evolutionary psychology that clicked for me, which was mate choice copying. I actually had asked when I interviewed Dr. Boss, I was like, is it advantageous for a man who's single to have a lot of female friends, as far as that being an advantage for him to date? And I had never asked this question. I'd never heard him discuss it. And he brought up MCC, and then he goes over the idea of cross-sex mind reading, which I absolutely agree with. And then the other idea, which is when women see you're approved by women, other women find you attractive. This is something, you as a guy just notice. You're in your 20s and you want to date a bunch of pretty girls and they ignore you. Then you have a girlfriend, and then all of a sudden you start getting messages from women. So it's this thing you witness or you feel anecdotally, and then you see the studies on it, and it's really, really amazing stuff. I don't know if you've gone over any of this in your work.
I haven't written about it or done research on it, but I do know the research you're talking about, and it is fascinating. It's sometimes called the wedding ring effect. So once as you have a wedding ring on your finger, suddenly, you attract more attention than before. It's really interesting, right? But I find it particularly interesting that it's not unique to humans. You find it in many other species. Fish, for instance.
Geese, for instance. They were actually, they were using stuffed geese, females that were not even real geese, and putting them near the males, and the females were coming up to those males.
Right. My hunch is that wouldn't work on humans. Like if you surround yourself.
No, it does. It does. It's called artificial intelligence. It's called AI photographs that you post on Instagram. Right. It probably does work on humans.
It might well. Mannequins though, I think geese are less discriminating. And is that an actual real goose?
Yeah.
I think if we had mannequins around us, it might be a bit creepy, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes, so it's fascinating, right? So geese and fish, and it's just a very, very widespread phenomenon. And it makes sense, right? It just makes sense that you can kind of cast off some of the cognitive labor of evaluating a potential mate 100% by yourself. You can just sort of you can in effect steal some of the cognitive labor of other individuals who've done that already.
Yeah.
But it's a shortcut, in other words.
It is a way I'd like to think of it is, if I see an attractive woman, I have perfect information. I can look at her and the things that I would want, especially if we're talking about for short term, I can see hip to waist ratio, symmetrical face, signs of youth, etc. She doesn't know if I'm an abusive individual. She doesn't know if I'm a dishonest individual, if I'm a violent individual. She doesn't know if I'm a generous individual. But if she sees a bunch of other women who are around me, and especially if those women are high status or very physically attractive, it's very in her mind. And I don't think this is a conscious decision. In her mind, she's just like, wow, of all the men who are consistently throwing it at me, here's this one guy who isn't paying attention to me, and there's women following around. I've just found that to be, I host beauty pageants as well. As a guy who does this for a while, I just can't tell you how often that I've seen that happen. And the girl that I'm seeing now, she straight up told me, she goes, "You're not my type. I wasn't attracted to you when I saw you. And then my roommate tried to make out with you. And then that's why I wanted to go out with you." She straight up admitted it. So to me, that was the one that didn't make the most sense. And then I started reading the data on it, and I was like, wow, that really does blow me away. There's something you talk about, the uncomfortableness of the fact that you have your bigoted or racist uncle or father who makes certain stereotypical beliefs, and a lot of them turn out to be true. And the fact that they are true or the fact that they may be stereotypical doesn't make them untrue, but it makes some people uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. That's a phenomenon called stereotype accuracy.
Yes.
So often in psychology, psychologists have just assumed without actually testing that stereotypes are inaccurate.
Yeah.
But when we've looked at the data, actually, it turns out that often just for a start, they're often directionally accurate. So they're in the right direction. Sometimes they're exaggerated, but often if you actually average out across lots of different people, some people exaggerate the magnitude of sex differences. Some people minimize it, and they actually underestimate. A lot of people actually underestimate how big sex differences are. The average is about right for a lot of traits, which is pretty interesting. And it is pretty uncomfortable. People are not fans of having that particular factoid pointed out.
Yeah. Oh, and it's not what you said, the extremes, like boys are better at math. Well, at the extremes, math geniuses tend to more be boys than women, but women do better academically in almost every field right now than men do. And women who are really good at math are also more likely to be superior verbally. So it's like the sex difference or the stereotype is kind of true, but not as far, the vector is correct, but not the magnitude. And so I think that's
exactly
a really,
right.
I think it's a really important distinction for people to make. But a lot of people find those things to be uncomfortable. And I think the main one is this, and I don't know why this one is so difficult. So when we talk about the magnitude of sex differences, the biggest physical one probably being upper body strength in men, or one of the biggest ones. The biggest one, I actually fooled my friends. I asked the question that you've asked on several podcasts: what's the biggest individual sex difference between men and women? And it's men's proclivity to be attracted to women and women's proclivity to be attracted to men. Obviously, that's like 2 standard deviations of majority of the time. That's what you'll find. But once you get after that, it's variety for sexual partners. Somewhere I read the average man, his variety or his desire for a variety of sexual partners or total number of sexual partners would be equal to the median man would be equal to the top 1 or 2% of women as far as how many they want. And then I would, the data on about 40% of men and 80% of women have reproduced, and that number might not be accurate, but somewhere around there, men having more testosterone than women. This is not a sociocultural thing. The fact that I have 17, the average man is going to have somewhere between 700 nanograms per deciliter, and the average woman's going to have like 60 nanograms per deciliter. 17 times as much testosterone, and testosterone regulating my libido and my necessity to take risks. And then waving that away and saying that it's sociocultural, that to me is beyond crazy, because like the testosterone is real. You can't act like it's not there.
Yeah, it's a massive difference, right? And there's virtually no overlap in testosterone levels between the sexes. In fact, in light of that, it's actually quite interesting that the sex differences and the associated behaviors, like risk-taking and sex drive, are actually a lot smaller than the size of the sex difference in testosterone. It is pretty interesting. So I'm guessing, so none of your friends got it right, got that, the largest psychological sex difference, right? It's fascinating, right?
They always say the casual sex and the variety of the desire for sexual partner, those ones, everyone gets those ones. And then after that, it's like aggression and violence. Those are the ones that people usually get the most. Yeah. But you're right. I'm not 17 times as strong as my girlfriend, right? I'm maybe 150%, 200% stronger, but I'm not 17 times as strong as her. So it is kind of interesting that it's not as far as it is. And you brought up something really important when you were talking about in school, that boys are actually punished more for being aggressive, more for being troublemakers. They're not encouraged to be more aggressive than women are. It's not a sociocultural thing, but also in the penal system, men get larger penalties for the same crimes that women do. Our society does not encourage men to be more violent. It does not. And men are violent in spite of that. And so I think that's a really interesting thing, that sex difference pervades, even though society doesn't want it to be that, or doesn't.
It's interesting. I find that fascinating. I think it's fascinating and quite a strong line of evidence for an innate contribution to the sex differences. So people will tend to say, well, it's because society is encouraging it. And this is a case where it's not even society encouraging it. It's actually the sex difference develops and appears even in spite of society actually trying to clamp down on it and eliminate it. So strong evidence. Yeah.
I mean, which kind of leads to the next point, which is what I thought was one of the most fascinating, the prenatal testosterone and the gender equal societies having greater sex differences were the 2 biggest ones. Actually, no, that's not correct. The biggest one was the sex differences in animals related, like chimpanzees and the level of violence. And I'm like, did the chimpanzees, are they victims of patriarchy as well? Like, I don't understand why the chimpanzees doing the same things that we're doing. But those 3 things were probably the biggest describers to me of like why these sex differences exist and that are why they are innate. But could you go into this one? This one is a fascinating one. And this has to do with the big 5 personality traits and women's proclivity to get into STEM, how we get into more egalitarian nations. A lot of people don't realize that Scandinavia has more egalitarian nations, and that in those places, a lot of times women make more money than men. And comparing, say, Sweden to Saudi Arabia and some of the differences or lack of differences we see there.
Yeah, it is a very counterintuitive result. And the result you're talking about, it's called the gender equality paradox. And so I guess one thing when we're talking about cross-cultural analyses, we actually find another quite strong line of evidence for a contribution of nature being involved in the differences. And that's the fact that a lot of the sex differences that I write about, all of them, in fact, are found either in every single culture or the vast majority of cultures.
Yes.
And the fact that that is the case, that'd be just a remarkable coincidence if it was all down to socialization.
By the way, if anyone's curious about this, look up Dr. David Buss's 1989 37 culture study. That's the first of many that show that you have Yanomamo in Venezuela, and then you also have people in Norway, Sweden, and Finland having the same, women caring more about a man's ability to procure status, and women caring more about men caring more about a woman's looks and fertility. Even in places where there's no television, there's no movies, there's no magazines, there's no media, they still have these same sex differences.
Incredible. It's a very strong line of evidence. But it's also quite intuitive. But the counterintuitive phenomenon is this gender equality paradox. And that refers to the fact that, I think what I would have expected, and what most people would expect, is that in more patriarchal cultures, in cultures where men and women are pushed into very different directions, you would expect that the sex differences would be bigger in those nations, even if there's a contribution of nature. You'd expect that you treat the sexes more differently, they become even more different still.
Yeah.
And that conversely, that in more egalitarian nations where all opportunities are opened to everybody, or at least that's what we're aiming at, and men and women are treated, and boys and girls are treated more similarly, you'd expect that the differences would be smaller. For some traits, that's true, but for a lot of traits, you actually find the exact opposite, surprisingly enough. So you find that in the more egalitarian nations, the differences are actually bigger rather than smaller. You find in the more patriarchal societies that actually the differences are smaller, at least for some traits. One of those traits is personality traits.
Yeah.
So personality, sex differences tend to be larger in Scandinavia than, for instance, in India. And another one that you also mentioned is sex differences in interests, in career-related interests. So the classic one there is that on average, in every single nation, as far as we know, men are more interested in things and things-related professions, whereas women are more interested in people and people-related professions. Those differences are found everywhere, but they actually are larger in more egalitarian nations than in less egalitarian ones. They're very surprising. I'm not 100% sure what's going on. My best guess is that gender equal nations are not just gender equal. They also tend to be more individualistic. They also tend to be wealthier. They also tend to have more education and various other differences like that. And all of those differences, that cluster of societal traits, are all traits that mean that people are more able to pursue their own interests and develop their own individuality, develop their own skills. And where that's the case, you can find that nascent individual differences get larger, and also nascent sex differences, average sex differences, get larger as well, just because people are more able to develop their own individuality in those nations.
So that freedom actually exposes sex differences. It doesn't get rid of them.
That's what I think is going on. And
right.
I should say that there is a big debate in psychology at the moment about whether the gender equality paradox is real and what are the causes of it. So but that's the explanation I'm most persuaded by so far.
Can we talk about a few? There's the ones I remember, which is agreeableness and neuroticism in women being greater in general. And then the idea that, there's this push, especially in the United States, I'm sure it is all over the world, to get more women into STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And in nations where they're fully able to get into STEM, they get into STEM less. And which is the opposite of what you would think. But when left to their own devices, especially like we talk about in Scandinavia, when there are fewer barriers to women getting into STEM, fewer women get into STEM. That's the paradox, right?
Exactly right. The only thing I would add to that is that it only applies to nations where men and women can both go into STEM in the first place.
Yes.
So if it's a very, very old-fashioned nation where they just simply say you're not allowed to go, you're not allowed to have a job, or you're not allowed to get into these areas.
Yes, Afghanistan's not really great on the female STEM field.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, once the doors are open, people go through those doors. They go through those doors. Men and women in all nations go through them to some degree, but more of one sex than the other. And yeah, that effect is exacerbated when people have greater freedom and also greater wealth. So I think that in some countries, women and men, they will basically put aside their preferences and just go for the job that's going to give them enough money because they need the money. It's much more crucial. Whereas when you have a good social safety net or a wealthy family, then you are a bit freer to go for what you want to do, even if it's not so lucrative. Now, personality differences. So yeah, you're right. So on average, women have higher levels of neuroticism than men. That just means they're more prone to certain negative emotions like depression and anxiety. That's typically measured as about a medium sex difference, about 0.5 standard deviation between the mean for women versus men. Agreeableness, that's just like friendliness, compassion, politeness, that cluster of traits. Women again score higher. That's also a medium sex difference, 0.5 standard deviation. The other three big five traits, the sex differences are not quite as reliably found. They are conscientiousness, extroversion, and openness to experience. And I think typically what you find that women do score a little bit higher in those, where you find a difference. So women are slightly more conscientious, slightly more open, and slightly more extroverted. But some studies don't find those differences. And those are, I think they probably are real, but I think they're small. Interestingly, though, there are sort of sub-traits or sub-facets to all of the big five traits. And the sex differences can go in opposite directions within those sub-traits. So with extroversion, for instance, on average, there's not much of a difference. Maybe women are a bit more extroverted. But if you break it down into facets, you find, for instance, that women tend to score higher in cheerfulness and sociability than men. Those are both facets of extroversion, whereas men score higher on the facet of assertiveness. And so those differences go in opposite directions. They kind of cancel out to some degree at the trait level, and they therefore reduce the size of the sex difference and kind of obscure some real sex differences in personality that are happening under the hood.
Without getting too political here, you do mention in the book the idea of some women who are feminists who want children even though they know they shouldn't want children. I forgot exactly how you say it, which I thought was interesting. And I try to boil everything down to first principles. Like what evolutionary problem, what ancestral problem does this solve? And like the desire for women in mass to not want children, I don't understand what evolutionary problem that solves. And so could that be the reason why they would be suffering more from depression? Not that obviously there's women out there that make the decision not to have children. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. What I'm saying is I believe maybe more are being arm twisted into believing that they shouldn't want to have children than actually naturally wouldn't want to have children, which may cause a mismatch, which may cause depression.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. I think what I say in the book, I talk about how it's not so much not having children at all versus having children that I talk about, although, that's an issue as well. I think I'm mainly talking about how when women have children, they often want to care for the kids full time, at least for a while early on, or they want to just work part-time so they can care for the kids. And in some cases, women want to do that, even though there's actually pressure that they get back full time and that they do both and that they prioritize the career or at least balance it rather than prioritizing the kids. and yeah, like you said, so I think sometimes women want those things, even though they feel that they shouldn't want them. And that there's a sort of push toward the full-time career being the most important thing, and the thing by which people, including women, should judge themselves. In terms of proneness to depression, I think there are certainly individuals who don't have kids and later regret it.
Yeah.
And so, that definitely happens. Whether that's a major cause, there's all this talk about an increase in levels of depression, the frequency of depression in society, whether that's due to pressure not to have kids, or just sort of pressures that push in the opposite direction of old tendencies. I'm not 100% sure.
Could one of our evolved tendencies be to get up, to be in sunlight every day, to go hunt for the meat, to procure for our tribe, to sit there and be active in service of our tribe, and we've lost all of that? Could that be where some of this depression comes from?
It could be, and to socialize, to hang out with people and to sit around and have a laugh. We are quite disconnected from the kind of things that our ancestors did throughout the day, throughout most of our evolution.
The children of celebrities, or the children of billionaires, and how they end up destroying their lives so frequently when they inherit all this money early on, because their ancestors were living. There were no billionaires 27,000 years ago, right? Everyone was fighting for survival back then, and so that you'd have to imagine that even though that was a brutal existence, you would have to be able to find some level of happiness or contentment in that existence. And the people who actually fought the hardest, those were the ones who would pass on their genes. And so now you take that away, and we have almost a callous-free society. Could the lack of, for some people, like, again, I think this is just an opinion I have. I think the Zoomification of our society that sort of happened after the pandemic, it hurt men more than women, because men are behind women socially to begin with. And men not being able to read social cues and coming off as awkward is far, far more damaging to a man being able to get a date than a beautiful woman who's awkward. She is not going to she's not going to suffer the same penalty getting a date because she's awkward. And so us not being in the same room with each other, it's ironic because we're on, right now we're talking on Riverside, 15 hours difference. But the Zoomification of our society, or the lack of the virtual nature of our society, I think hurts men more than women. And I think that's one of the issues as well.
That's really interesting. Certainly in the dating sphere, that definitely rings true. I think you're right. And I think in terms of factors that increase depression, people need a challenge. I think people need to master something, to feel like they've got some kind of challenge in their life, not some overwhelming challenge that can that can cause massive stress in its own right. But people need a challenge, and people who grow up children of billionaires, child stars, maybe that's taken away from them. Maybe it's just sort of taken away from all of us to some degree in wealthy societies as well. The challenges just don't feel quite so intense.
That was the derivative of what I was saying next. Is like now as we get into societies that have more of a social safety net, or where men and women don't need men as much, and you have like more childcare, you have just a better, maybe better is not even the right way to say it. Maybe a more frictionless existence. Well, part of that frictionless existence may cause you to become depressed. And I'm just saying this again. I'm not a social scientist. I haven't done studies on this, but I have at this point 4,700 clients, and I will tell you across the board, I've never seen an exception to that. I've never seen the guy who lays around and does nothing. And then again, I just think about it ancestrally. Like, what problem are you solving by being depressed in the cave while everyone else is out hunting? And then when I solve a problem with my teammates, when I solve a problem with my team, I can't imagine anything happier. And then I watch the World Cup, and I see these nations just cheering each other on because they're watching a group of men accomplish a goal. And I was just like, okay, again, for that many people, for that many billions of people to be watching, something about the World Cup has to be involved with something innate in us, right? There's some ancestral problem that we're seeing an allegory. Obviously, kicking a ball is not solving a problem ancestrally, but something in there, watching the tribe of men go out to procure the protein, something about cheering them on has to like live in us ancestrally.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, working as a team and working against another group as well. I think it kind of plays to our in-group, out-group, tribalistic psychology as well. Frictionless, I think, is a great term for what we're talking about. I think the frictionless,
more frictionless.
Exactly.
The idea that people weren't happy before antibiotics, and obviously when you think about how horrible the infant mortality rate, over 50%, I believe before the year 1850, half the Earth's population died before the age of 5. Like, it's crazy numbers like that. Yeah. Until, and I tell my clients all the time when they're depressed, I'm like, you live in a time with broad spectrum antibiotics and access to healthcare. You live, how's that air conditioning going for you? How are those 3 meals you had today? And you just don't recognize like how incredibly brutal existence was before that. One other stat that you brought up that I thought was so telling was, in the more traditional societies, men do not commit suicide more, which the social scientists might tell you the opposite should be true.
Yeah, I mean, in the more traditional societies, that is, I see what you mean. I was just trying to upload that piece. So yes, I was talking. So basically, in most modern nations, you do find that men are much more likely to kill themselves.
Yes,
I think maybe China is one exception. At least at some point when I looked at the data,
here it's about 4 to 1 in the US.
Yeah, 4 to 1,
and then it skyrockets to 9 to 1 if we're talking about divorce.
Yeah, and I think it gets bigger for older men, younger men as well. It's less common among younger men than older men, but the gap is bigger. And so 3 to 4 times across nations is the number I have in my head. 3 to 4 times more likely. And then the question is why. And one suggestion is that it's due to patriarchal pressures, and masculinity norms, that kind of thing.
Yes.
If that were the case, though, you'd think that in more patriarchal societies, the gaps would get bigger, and societies with more masculine norms, they get bigger. And actually, you don't find that at all. And if anything, it's the reverse. The differences are smaller. I am pretty sure that in most more traditional societies, I think males still do, and most of them commit suicide more often. Just because they're more violent, they're more
they're more likely to use the gun in the balcony, and women are more likely to use the sleeping pills. Yeah, that's what I've to my understanding. The attempts are are similar, but men complete it successfully more because of their methods.
Yeah, I actually think the attempts, women are more likely to attempt. Men are more likely to actually succeed. And I've heard people say that just men are better at doing it, and they joke men are better at accomplishing their goals.
Yes, men are better at things,
actually most men as well.
And women are better with people.
Right. Things, guns, and
Don't ban us on YouTube, please.
But actually, most suicide attempts of men and women do fail. It's just that among the small number that succeed, a lot more men than women. But that is more so in freer, less patriarchal societies than in more patriarchal ones.
So one of the sort of standard pieces of advice that we hear in my nation, we're all basically being educated by TikTok at this point, is the idea that men do not go to therapy enough. They don't work on themselves enough. They're not they don't express themselves enough, and they don't have enough emotional intelligence. And then Chris Williamson brought up a stat that I just thought was mind blowing, which was for the men who attempted to take their own life, 91% of them had called some sort of suicide hotline beforehand and still attempted it, which kind of lets you know that there's something broken in this chain where therapy maybe doesn't, or the way therapy is done in the United States doesn't work the same way for men as it does for women. And then you see the lowest rates of suicide are in more traditional nations. And that those two things kind of like fit what I see anecdotally, which is when I have a friend who's depressed, if he starts dating a woman he's really attracted to and going to the gym every day, magically the depression goes away. Now, I'm not a doctor, I don't know that for sure, but that's what I see is like the squat rack and the bench press seem to help a lot of my friends get out of depression.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a very, very tricky issue. And I think where people say men should do this and men should do that, when men are depressed, when women are depressed as well, I think they're right. They need to do something. I just think that we have not completely worked out what that something is yet.
Yeah.
I think that therapy does seem to be somewhat effective, but I think it's in the early days. I think we have been, I think it's oversold. I think it's oversold how effective it is. It is effective. You should, if you are feeling depressed, you should give it a go. You should give, all sorts of different options a go. But yes, I do think we as psychologists have a lot of work still to do. We really haven't made that much progress over the last 10, 20, 30 years. The psychologist Paul Bloom points this out. He points out that therapy does seem to work, but it doesn't work any better today than it did several decades ago. So I don't know. There's some secret sauce that we haven't discovered yet, I think.
Speaking of which, the falsifiability studies that all of psychology went through, and evolutionary psychology seemed to, come through pretty much unscathed. And I was wondering if you could go into more specifics about that, because I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah. So the replication crisis that hit psychology, I guess must be nearly 15 years ago about 15 years ago that started, was that we discovered that a lot of our results, including a lot of very, very famous results that we thought were as solid as anything in science, weren't as solid as anything in science at all. And they didn't actually replicate. And in many cases, it seems they were just basically not true. I think social psychology is the field that got hit hardest by the replication crisis. And to their credit, I think they have been really working on trying to improve their game. Evolutionary psychology did pretty well. Like you say, it wasn't completely unscathed. There were some studies that we were pretty confident in that we no longer are. One of them is the idea that when women are ovulating, they switch from being attracted to their primary partner to instead being attracted to somebody else, to other
Ovulation.
people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ovulatory shift hypothesis. And that has been challenged quite severely. And I personally no longer buy it. I think if I had to bet, I would bet against that hypothesis. But a lot of the core results, all the results that we've been talking about so far, so sex differences in interest in casual sex and sexual variety, sex differences in aggression, sex differences in mate preferences, sex differences in parental inclinations, all of those have replicated well. And I think there's a few reasons why we've got such a good replication rate. One is that the hypotheses that we test often come from theories in evolutionary biology that are very well established and that have been applied to many other species. So they're very, 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 very solid scientific theories. Another is that a lot of these sex differences are found in other species as well. And so that's just another line of evidence that I think we didn't mention already for a sex difference in humans having an innate contribution to it, is the fact that you find it in other species as well. And then on top of that, I think we've had a bit of an advantage that feels like a disadvantage, which is the fact that people and other psychologists and other social scientists dislike evolutionary psychology so much and don't want to think that our predictions are true, has meant that we have had a higher threshold, higher evidentiary threshold than many other areas of psychology, like social psychology.
In a way, you're suffering from the exact discrimination that they claim that you're imposing on women specifically. Like literally the standard to which you have to prove things like mate choice or parental investment hypothesis or whatever, the standard to which you have to choose things like dual mating strategy versus whatever, the standard to which you have to prove it is actually higher because few people, and it's just funny because the whole point of not liking evolutionary psychology is the belief in discrimination, and yet it is the victim of discrimination in this case.
Yeah. Although in a way, because it pushes us to get better, stronger results, we've had to test our hypotheses a lot more rigorously to be able to persuade anybody. And we have made some progress in persuading people.
And let me put this out again. There's fewer than 50 books in the world you can buy on evolutionary psychology. Steve Stewart-Williams has 3 of them. David Buss has 5 of them. And there's fewer than 50 in the world. And on social psychology, which did much poorer in the replicatability crisis, there's 3,700 books on that. And so this is what I was saying before. This is the soccer player who's on the minimum salary, who's leading the EPL in scoring. This is the most underrated player in the league. And I was also wondering if you could go, I don't know, did you ever see the video by Mooncat, I Debunked Evolutionary Psychology? It's got like 2 million views on YouTube. You ever see that?
A few years ago, but I don't think I actually got around to watching it. I think I know the one you mean.
She basically goes over David Buss and Jeffrey Miller mostly. And Mack and Murphy and William Costello do a rebuttal, and their rebuttal is tremendous. I actually made all my clients watch the rebuttal because they go over all what you talked about before, replicatable sex differences. And the other reason why is I'm actually debating an anti-evolutionist on August 19th. And so I'm going to kind of use it as my baseline. I asked Dr. Buss one time, I was like, do you want to debate an anti-evolutionist with me sometime? Because I think it'd be really interesting to see the reaction.
Yeah.
But
or Mackin,
what?
Mackin or William Costello, they're all great. I think they'd all be excellent at doing that.
I think Mackin is great, and I think William, even when William or Mackin say something that I disagree with, I think they're being academically honest, which is why I respect both of them so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really terrific. And the other person is, is an autodidact in this field, is Chris Williamson. Like I will say, no matter what he says, if I agree or disagree, the fact that he was who I believe the first large mainstream podcast to platform evolutionary scientists, like even Joe Heinrich, evolutionary biologists, Richard Dawkins, you having Geoffrey Miller on, David Buss, William Costello, having all those people on. That, do you realize one of the things I always thought was so crazy is Joe Rogan lived in the same city with David Buss for years before he had him on, and on Joe Rogan's logo is a monkey. Literally, because he talks about evolution, and the world's foremost evolutionary psychologist is sitting like not even 10 blocks from your studio. And it took Jordan Peterson convincing Joe Rogan to have David Buss on the show. And it's just mind blowing to me. I was like, how was he not the first guy that you had on your show? And the reason why is because he probably had a lot of the same biases that a lot of other people had about replicatability and falsifiability. And so again, not to sit here and play victim, but I just want to point out to other people, if you wanted to start in psychology, this is where I would start. I think this is probably the most important branch of psychology.
Well, I mean, I bias, of course, because it's my field, but I do agree. And actually, I would argue that it's my field because I think that it's the most important. Is that the reason I chose it? I just think it's just made some serious inroads into explaining the human mind and human behavior, behavior genetics as well. It's all just great stuff.
I'm curious, does it have any predictions? Are there any things that you predict would happen in the future based on evolutionary principles?
Yes. So the first one that comes to mind is, I think, that I would predict less change in the future in terms of the sort of sex differences that we see around us than other people might. So I've given various talks over the years where people say, well, these sex differences, okay, they're here. You persuaded me that they exist, but times are changing. And, it's a very different world today than it used to be. And people are challenging the gender roles and, see what happens in 10 years or 20 years. That's usually young people, like young students who will make those arguments. Because I think they have the perception that this is the first time gender roles have been challenged, whereas actually they've been challenged since at least the 1960s and 70s. People are constantly predicting we're just about to completely radically shift everything. And who knows, maybe in 20 years, they argue, maybe 20, 30 years, maybe women will watch more porn than guys do. And maybe women will be more interested in casual sex, and maybe women will choose men who can look after the home, and men, it could all switch around. And so I would say that the key prediction from this area is that things are going to be more, like it or not, things are going to be more stable than you would expect if you take a sociocultural view, purely sociocultural view.
I'll tell you why I agree with you. It's at the end of Men Behaving Badly, when Dr. Buss talks about if one of the reasons why these proclivities pervade in men is because women keep rewarding those men with sex. And that's a very controversial thing to say. And by the way, it's the other way around. The reason why women look the way they do is because men wanted to breed with those women. And so when it's like, hey, we're going to change these proclivities will change. Here's how if any of you social scientists out there, if you want to end sex differences, here's what you do. You get women to stop dating big, strong, aggressive, assertive men. You get women to stop dating men who are, take more risks. That's what you do. And you get men to stop dating women who have signs of youth and fertility. If you were to do that, then maybe you could breed those sex differences out. But because they're innate, and because we have more freedom, and because women are choosing men based on their physical attractiveness, because you see the dating app data, and I don't know if you saw the Hans Larson GSS study that showed that the top 10% most promiscuous men were having 58% of the sexual encounters with all women. It's crazy numbers like that. It's like unfettered globalized hypergamy. When you see those things, it's like, I actually agree with you totally. I think they're going to be totally stable because we talk about the frictionless society. There's no selection pressure to get rid of sex differences. If there
Yeah.
was, then I could see them go away. But because there's no selection pressure for anything. There's 600,000 elephants on this planet and 8 billion humans. We won.
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what happened to Neanderthals? We ate them and killed them. They're all gone. 27,000 years ago. We won. There's no there's no apex predator over us. And so I think a lack of selection pressure is going to cause less change in the phenotype, less change in us genetically overall.
Yeah, indeed. And, you know, to change things at the genetic level, you'd have to have that selective breeding program going for thousands of years, right? So it's just completely, it's unrealistic. I think we are sort of stuck with certain proclivities and nudges from natural selection in certain directions, quite strong nudges often. Of course, at the same time, we can create social structures that aim to, I guess, promote the good side of human nature and our
Yes.
altruistic capacity, while trying to diminish the less good side, like our propensity for aggression, you know, where in a lot of cases, aggression and violence in particular has negative effects, and we can control that. It's just, I think that we need to figure out ways to social structures that take human nature seriously. And we just need to assume that human nature is going to be roughly what it is for, you know, effectively and definitely. And so we need to work with that rather than against it.
Yeah, I've experienced jealousy. I understand where it comes from. I understand it's an evolutionary adaptation. I understand it's not just me being immature. You've probably experienced it too. Probably every man you've ever met has experienced it. And so what do I do with my jealousy? I go to the gym.
Yeah.
I let it fuel me.
So
There's ways to transmute this into something healthy, but to deny it exists is problematic.
it is. It's false. You know, it's not true that it doesn't exist. It's not true that it's not innate. It's not. But at the same time, I think to figure out the best way to deal with it, we need to have an accurate understanding of where it comes from. And because if we just think it's due to socialization, then we can just say, okay, well, if we change the way we socialize people, we can make this problem go away. Whereas that's unlikely to be true. Then we need to think of ways to deal with these, you know, not this unpleasant side of human nature.
I was wondering, could you rank, because we've been talking about sex differences, somebody who's just coming to this and have no idea what we're talking about, they think sex differences is just like gonads. Could you rank the biggest set for me? The ones that I had always known about was variety of sexual partners, upper body muscle. Could you rank the ones that are the big sex differences, the medium ones, and then the ones that are very small?
Yep, could do. So at the top, the biggest ones are basically physical differences, like the difference in upper body strength. That's huge. Another huge one, funnily enough, is the sex difference in voice pitch. That is a very big difference in our species. And it's actually bigger in humans than in other apes, including other apes that are more sexually dimorphic for size than we are. The biggest psychological sex difference is the one you mentioned earlier, the one that no one can ever guess, even though it's really, really obvious. Once you actually have it spelled out, it's so obvious, has a clear evolutionary rationale, but no one guesses it, which is the primary focus of sexual attraction. Most men primarily are attracted to women, and vice versa for most women. Then you move quite a long way down the scale after that one, and you find, sex differences in what's called sociosexuality. So interest in casual sex, willingness to engage in sex in the absence of a close emotional bond. A couple of other ones that are in the same ballpark, or actually maybe even slightly bigger, are a bit surprising. One of them is the sex difference in career-related interests that we mentioned earlier, the things versus people difference. Another one is the sex difference in childhood play preferences, like toy preferences. And the reason I find those slightly surprising is that both toys and careers, modern careers, they're evolutionarily unprecedented. So it's kind of a little bit surprising that we have these strong, partly innate differences that are so large, even though they
something that didn't exist ancestrally.
Exactly. It's kind of weird, right? The sex difference in face-to-face aggression, if we're talking about sort of low-level verbal aggression, I would say that that's a medium sex difference. So it is not as large as the sex difference in interest in casual sex, for instance. But actually, it's worth pointing out that for the aggression sex difference, and actually for a lot of sex differences, the more extreme you get, the bigger the sex differences are. So verbal aggression, medium difference, low-level physical aggression, it's a bigger sex difference there. Violent crime is quite a huge sex difference. And then homicide is a massive sex
Yes.
difference. So like more than 90% of homicides perpetrated by men in every society.
Yeah. I think where people miss the point here is less than 1% of the population commit homicide. But of that,
Yes.
so that's 3 standard deviations out. Of that small 1% or a third of 1%, that of that group, it's far more men than women. It doesn't mean the vast majority of men still do not commit sexual assault or homicide, but
Exactly.
the ones that do, of the ones that do, they're mostly men. I think, and a lot of people miss that point. They think we're all just
they do.
taking time bombs ready to go hurt people, and I think that's where we get kind of confused here.
That is perfectly put. I completely agree with that. Yeah, just focusing on the extremes can give you a distorted impression of the size of the sex difference in the general population. Excuse me. Okay, so at the medium level, what else is there? So yeah, the sex differences in neuroticism and agreeableness, those are medium sex differences. Then moving down the scale, small sex differences would include other personality differences like openness, extroversion, and conscientiousness. One that surprises quite a few people is the sex difference in self-esteem is a small sex difference by most measures. I think the stereotype is that men have really, really high, unrealistically high self-esteem. Women have lower or low self-esteem. And at the extremes, that's true. At the extremes, once again, among this minority of super, super arrogant people who just think they're God's gift to the world, many more of them are men than women. But most men aren't actually like that. And, it's vice versa for women. So that's a small difference at the average. What else? Those are the main ones that come to mind in the ranking scheme.
The other one I just wanted to go over briefly was the concept of patriarchy theory, which is the idea that men assault women on behalf of all men. This is one of the issues I have with throughout history. Have women been subjugated? Yes. Have men run the majority of societies for the last 3,000 years? Let's go back to agricultural revolution, last 11,000. Yes, absolutely. No one's disagreeing with that. But the idea that we all have secret group chats where we're all working together to sort of, hold down women. This is the part because that's what patriarchy theory is. It's not just that men rule the world. It's the idea that men are nefariously, not negligently, but nefariously co-conspiring to rule the world. And so this idea in patriarchy theory, which is maddening to me, is the idea that men assault women on behalf of all men. But the thing that you said most succinctly is gay men also assault other men.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's an unrealistic theory, I think. So basically, it implies that, men are altruistically helping all other men to elevate above all women. Whereas what I think is going on is that it's much more individual level focused, that individuals are trying to benefit themselves.
Yes.
And the nearest and dearest, right? So they try to benefit themselves, family members of both sexes, friends of both sexes. At the same time, there are societal norms and beliefs that are guiding people's behavior. But yes, I do think the idea that men are conspiring for all other men in the world, most of whom they don't even know, most of whom who are strangers, and some of whom are rivals, just seems evolutionarily unrealistic.
Yeah, it's madness. If you go on TikTok right now, I reacted to this one woman's video. She got 100,000 likes on a video basically stating that all you have to do is not sexually assault women, and in comparison to other men, you look like such a great person that women will fall all over you. And I was like, there's no data that shows that anyone benefits. No one's relationship benefits from assault. No one. But it's so crazy. But that the issue is not, I mean, obviously we're saying we know that's not the case. The issue is the video got 100,000 likes. The issue is something that non-scientific and actually dangerous was not taken down. I'm not recommending she lose her account or whatever, but there needs to be just some sort of fact checker thing like, hey, this is not realistic. What she's saying could be damaging. But we don't do that at all. We'll do it if someone says something about flat earth or if somebody says something about the vaccines, but we won't do it whenever someone has unrealistic expectations about the fact that men assault women on behalf of other men. That is madness.
Yeah. And the idea that the vast majority of men do this is not realistic in Western nations. And I do worry that it creates a very negative view of the world for a lot of people, in particular, a lot of young women, and unrealistic and just sort of creates totally unnecessary tensions between the sexes by judging all men in terms of the minority of men who do really, really bad stuff.
I'm curious, have you seen Deborah So's book, Sextinction, and Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation?
Yeah, I'm aware of both. Haven't read either.
Both books go over the idea that women use social media more than men and are more affected by it than men. More women than men report feeling like they look inadequate because of what they see and more likely to suffer from depression. And then there's the New Statesman study. The first place I saw this was from Modern Wisdom, where they talked about the fact that this is in the UK. They surveyed 2,000 people under the age of 30, and 50% of them, 72% of the men had a positive view of women. 7% of them had an actively negative view of women. For women under the age of 25, 35% had a positive view of men, only 35%, and 21% of women had an actively negative view of men. So the issue is like the propaganda we see on social media, it goes both ways. There's anti-women and anti-men propaganda. It just seems like the anti-man propaganda seems to be a little bit more effective at what it's trying to do. And so there's a lack of balance. This is the reason why you see Scott Galloway and Chris Williamson constantly having to do these land acknowledgments every time they discuss this subject, because they get in trouble. And the first thing Chris asked you was, hey, could you have published this book 6 years ago? I'm just saying, if there was scientific data that came out that women were more intelligent than men, you would not have had to worry about publishing that 6 years ago. But a book that is on sex differences, you literally, it's something you have to worry about.
Yes. Well, I should say that with the intelligence difference, there's basically no difference in the average level of intelligence.
Yeah, there is no difference. I'm saying,
I know, you know,
of course, the average IQ for men and women is the same, but the more women live underneath the one standard deviation curve than men or more outside of the extremes, for sure.
Greater variability, for sure.
Yeah, I'm saying in general, had we discovered that, had there been some peer-reviewed data that showed that, then you would not have to worry about producing that content. Nobody.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I've done research on that actually, where my colleagues and I have found that people are a lot more accepting of research that puts women in a better light than men.
Yes.
Than they have research that puts men in a better light than women. And they will rate the former as being the research is higher quality, even when it's described exactly the same way. They will rate female favoring research as better in quality. The researchers are more trustworthy, less likely to do harm. We don't need to suppress it. Whereas it's the exact opposite for male favoring research. They say, oh, it's really bad research, actually, even though it's described the same way. Not done very well. The researchers are no good. The researchers are not trustworthy. We should suppress this. This is likely to do harm.
Well, let's get back to the sex differences. Could it be that men just aren't as offended? Because when if I tell one of my male clients, hey, dude, you need to lose weight or women are not going to like you, I've never had a single one get offended. And I'm just curious, could that be a sex difference, a proclivity to be offended?
I think it could be. I think that I have seen research about jokes. I think women are more likely to categorize jokes as being offensive.
Sure.
So I think you're probably onto something there. And I wonder if that does sort of also relate to women's greater proneness to certain negative emotions.
Anxiety, I was meaning more depression. So if data had come out, if there was peer-reviewed data that came out that put men in an unfavorable light, I don't see men protesting or saying that this person is not allowed to speak on my campus. That's what I mean. And that's what The Coddling of the American Mind, another book by Jonathan Haidt, he goes over this. Basically, the first generation of children that grew up with a cell phone through puberty, they were the first ones to invoke cancel culture on these campuses, not letting people come and speak, right? And
that's very interesting.
Yeah, the people who come and speak, I think a lot of them might. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I think that is really interesting. I think that you're onto something. Interestingly enough, though, it's actually men and women were more offended by the female favoring sex differences.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes.
So it was both sexes. Women on average disliked all the sex differences more, and women on average disliked the female favoring sex differences more. But yes, both sexes thought that the female favoring sex differences were worse than the male favoring ones. And I think maybe it's a big part of it is that people tend to be more protective of women than men.
Yes, and they should be. There's no issue with that. 100%. I am one of the women I date. I'm 100 pounds heavier than them. I totally understand. I don't go outside and worry about when I walk to my car. And something could happen to me. I just don't worry about it. And I totally grasp that concept. One of the issues that I have seen, Steve, is the issue when it comes to, and this is a touchy subject here, but we are, according to every report I've seen, essentially in the United States, I don't know about other places, but we're at the lowest rates of rape and sexual assault in modern recorded history. Women absolutely have every right to still feel worried and to still look out for their own safety and to surround themselves with men or whatever to protect themselves from these horrible things happening to them. No problem with women being afraid. My question is, why are they more afraid?
It is interesting, isn't it? Because
I understand why you're afraid. I totally grasp that. In every case, that's why I walk my female friends. You know, I live here in Las Vegas. We'll go to a nightclub. I'm always walk them to their car. 100%. I understand why you're afraid. What I don't understand is, why are you more afraid? Because, like I said, we're at the lowest rates of sexual assault, rape in recorded human history.
Yes, and not only that, it's the lowest rates, even though willingness to report rapes has gone up.
Yes,
and even despite that, the trend line is down in terms of the frequency of these things. Yeah, I wonder if part of it is just that, well, not everybody knows that. I think that's news to most people. There's news that should be good news, but, you know, and should spread like wildfire. But, but maybe not everybody is aware of it. And I guess there's an ironic effect that maybe part of the reason it's gone down is that we talk about it more. We've become more aware of it. We talk about the risks. And maybe we have made people more frightened of it. And actually the fear is part of the reason it's gone down.
I think cameras are also part of it. I think we record everything.
Yeah.
I think that's another reason why.
Indeed. Yeah. So that exactly. We see it. It feels like it's really, really common. It feels like it's more common than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I want to ask you about is these natural experiments. These are phenomenal. I love that anytime we can, it's like the holy grail when you get monozygotic twins and they grow up in different households. It's like the scientists jump at that data because you're going to be able to find out, because, you know, two people with 100% the same DNA, what differences do we see? And I was wondering, what can you tell from some of these natural experiments, including CAH and twin studies?
CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, is a condition where fetuses, male and female fetuses, are exposed to very, very high levels of testosterone in the womb. For males, it doesn't make any difference because males are exposed to high levels of testosterone anyway. But for females, it masculinizes them to some degree.
Yeah,
masculinizes their body a little bit, but it also seems to masculinize their minds. So girls and women that were exposed to high levels of testosterone in the womb tend to exhibit they're shifted in a male typical direction.
Yes.
So they are more likely to be interested in male type careers when they're little girls. And as women, they're more likely to be in those careers. They, as we discussed, they're more likely to be attracted to other women, either as lesbians or as bisexuals. They are often less parentally inclined. As little girls, they're less interested in marriage and having kids. As little kids, they often engage in more male typical play as well. Yeah. They don't act exactly like boys, but they just sort of shifted in a male typical direction in a very noticeable way.
We might call him a tomboy. The girl who, exactly. when we would go out, kick the soccer ball or throw the football, she'd rather hang out with us. Hang out with the guys. Yeah,
exactly.
Ride our bikes with us. Right. For sure. One of the things I thought was interesting, though, is this is how I try to explain it. You tell me if this analogy is incorrect. You kind of get two testosterone bursts. You get one prenatal, and then you get one at puberty. If you're a male and you don't get the one prenatally and you get the one at puberty, you grow up as a male presenting guy who has more, would you say, female presenting traits, including possibly homosexuality. And then if you are a female and you get the prenatal testosterone and you also get it, you get the testosterone during puberty, you're female presenting, but you're more likely to be attracted to women and more likely to be drawn into male dominated fields. But if you are born, let's say, as a man and you identify as a homosexual, giving you more testosterone doesn't make you heterosexual. So that change in proclivity is only the prenatal change. It is not the puberty change.
I think that's right. The only thing I would add to that is that with women with CAH, they have the prenatal burst of testosterone, but they don't have the pubertal one as well. They don't have it.
Okay. Yeah.
But you do see the double whammy in some animal experiments where they will take some kind of mammal, female mammal in the womb, expose it to lots of testosterone, and then also give it a big testosterone bump at puberty as well. And that can lead, for instance, to greater levels of aggression. So females will engage in male typical forms of aggression if they get that double whammy. They will also, they mount other females as well, sexually mount females in the way that males typically do. Yeah. So, it's all pretty interesting.
That's pretty wild.
And twin study. Yeah, it is wild, right?
Yeah, one more thing before we get to twin study. What causes high levels of prenatal testosterone or low levels of prenatal testosterone? Is it completely random? And do we see multiple siblings having the prenatal testosterone? Is it, or multiple siblings not having it? Where does that come from?
I'm not completely sure, but I think that it is some kind of reproductive problem in the mother. And I would say that it almost certainly does run in families. So if one individual has it, there's an increased chance of other individuals within the family having it, although they don't necessarily, but it just a somewhat elevated chance.
Well, the twin studies.
Yeah, twin studies. Yeah. So twin studies are really, really useful for figuring out the nature and nurture of individual differences. And what you typically find is that every single trait is partially heritable, basically without exception. So what that means is that if you take a bunch of individuals looking at a particular trait, those individuals, they vary in the trait, whatever it happens to be, whether it's intelligence or personality traits or interests or whatever it is, people differ. And those differences are correlated to some degree with differences in their genes. And roughly 50% of the differences among those individuals are likely to be due to differences among them in genes, depending a bit on the trait, a bit higher for intelligence, but lower for personality. But yeah, they're all partially heritable. So the individual difference is partly nature, partly nurture. Very interesting finding though is that the twins who grow up apart, so take two identical twins and they grow up apart, and if you compare them to identical twins who grow up together, I think the natural expectation will be that the twins who grow up together are going to be somewhat more similar to each other than the twins who grow up apart because they share a family home. And what we find is that they often are a bit more similar in childhood, but by adulthood, they're often hardly more similar at all. And for some traits, they're no more similar if they grow up together than if they grow up apart, which is it's another very counterintuitive finding. Now, when you tell people about that, they often say, oh, right, so you're saying it's all down to the genes. But it's not all down to the genes. We know it's not, because we know that identical twins are not literally identical. They're very, very similar, surprisingly similar, but they're not literally identical. So it can't just be due to the genes. So what the implication is that the family home seems to be having less of an impact on how people turn out than we would expect.
Yeah, that was my next question, is the idea that parenting doesn't have the effect that people think that it has, unless it's bad parenting. And if it's neglectful parenting, then it has a very strong effect. But if it is very, very good parenting, then you tend to see more so peer group and genetics having more of an effect.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So basically, when you get to a good enough level of parenting, getting better and better and better has diminishing returns in terms of how it pays off. That's interesting in itself. I think it's also interesting for the discussion of sex differences in particular, because that being the case, well, I think a lot of folks think that the primary source of sex differences is the parental home and how parents treat girls versus boys, sons versus daughters. But then if we look at this data and it says, well, look, actually parents don't have a huge impact on their kids within the normal range, that kind of pulls the rug out from underneath that particular explanation for sex differences.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen the data on people fighting to get into the best preschool for their kids. And it just seems to have no effect at all when you look at it. And then the other one that's really big is like when you have two really intelligent people and they have an intelligent child, it is fun to talk about the heritability of intelligence. But if you have two people who are not intelligent and they have a child that doesn't get good grades, then all of a sudden intelligence being heritable is euthanization and it's not euthanization.
It's not so much
eugenics.
Fun to talk about that.
It's not as fun to talk about. Now we're getting into eugenics. And as all of a sudden it becomes a problem. And the idea is all of it's heritable. And you could also, some of the most capable human beings I've ever met in my life don't have a 140 IQ. And so that's the other thing. We, the soft the soft bigotry of male accomplishment or whatever that he was talking about before.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we've
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
done that with IQ. Having a super high IQ, you've seen that data, a guy with a IQ over 130 is more likely to be a virgin than a guy with an IQ under 80.
Yeah.
And it makes sense
Yeah.
because the
I've
guy
seen
with the
that,
IQ
those
under
data.
80 is
Yeah.
like, I'm going to the gym and I'm just going to go up and talk to the girl. The guy with the IQ over
Yeah.
130 is neurotic. He's overthinking
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. IQ definitely isn't the only trait that matters. It is generally useful in modern societies, but so are lots of things. And yeah, I mean, I get why people are not keen to be, it's kind of a bummer, especially when
Yeah.
you're looking at the lower end of that trait or any desirable trait. The fact that the lower end of that trait is partially heritable, it is bad news, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not true. And I do think that we do need to face the facts. And if we want to make the world a better place, the way to do that is to face the facts rather than just trying to suppress them and pretend we live in a world that we don't live in.
The other sex difference thing that I thought was tremendous is, and also goes back to the prenatal testosterone, is gay men commit fewer crimes than straight men, which on its surface you kind of grasp, but when you think about it, if they have the same levels of testosterone and gay men commit fewer crimes than straight men, then there's something going on in the wiring, which I think is the hypothesis anyway. The prenatal testosterone changes the actual brain mechanics, and then lesbian women commit more crimes than straight women. That's another, that is a crazy statistic when you really think about it, because that is not a function of testosterone or even like risk taking. It's a function of a more masculinized brain in utero and a more feminized brain in utero.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting result. And it's particularly interesting because the vast majority of males, gay or straight, they had the same social influences, right? They had the same TV shows, they had the same, whatever people are trying to attribute this to, movies where males are being violent and video games and just the social pressure that people have, like don't be a wuss, is said to boys rather than girls. All the same pressures, and yet nonetheless, they are less likely to commit crimes, including violent crimes, and the converse. For girls, they have the same social pressures, the same role models, and yet, lesbian women somewhat more likely commit crimes and violent crimes in particular. Called what's the name of it? The gender shift hypothesis, which is that for a lot of traits, gay men and lesbians are somewhat shifted toward the other sex.
It really, on its face, it seems obvious, but if you really think about the implications of it, it's very, very strong, because the belief is, first off, that means these things are innate, number one. And so what it says is straight men and lesbian women commit more crimes. Gay men and straight women commit fewer. That really does make, when you see that correlation, it really does lead into, number one, the things being innate. Number two, these things being sex differences. One of the funny ones that I love that everyone talks about is the Clark and Hatfield study, where a guy walks around, good looking guy walks around and tells, you can describe it. It's I bring this one up all the
Classic
time.
Study, right?
Classic study.
It's a really good one. They did it in the 70s, this study, the first
when you could do
indeed. And basically, though, Clark and Hatfield disagreed about what the outcome would be. They disagreed that men would be more likely to say yes to an offer of casual sex than women would be. And so it's to settle a bet, basically, this whole study. Yeah, so they got a bunch of good-looking men, good-looking women, young folks, students to help them with the study. And they would go around the campus, nice day, and they would approach members of the other sex, and they would say, "Hi, I know you don't know me, but I've seen you around the campus, and I find you very attractive." Now, I think this was before mobile phones. These days, perhaps people would be calling the police at that point. It sounds quite stalkerish.
Oh, by the way,
Still,
Steve, there's an actual strategy. It's called Mode 1. Going up to women and directly asking them to go to bed with you. There's a book called Mode 1. There's a black pill, blue pill incel community. There's a Mode 1 community that literally does this. Anyway, go ahead.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, look it up if you get a chance. Look up Mode 1.
Yeah, we'll do. That's fascinating. So they went along. Hey, how you doing? Noticed you around. You're very attractive. I was wondering whether you wanted to, and then they would finish that sentence with one of three options. So in one experimental condition, they would say, do you want to go on a date with me? In the second condition, they would say, do you want to come up to my room? And then in the third condition, they would say, do you want to go to bed with me? And so basically, in the first study, the results are very interesting. They found basically no sex difference for the first question. So do you want to date with me? About 50% of men said yes, about 50% of women said yes. They had done later replications where actually men are more likely than women to say yes to that request, which is what I would have predicted. So yeah, not much of a sex difference there. But then for the second question, there's a massive sex difference that opens up. And so the question is, do you want to come up to my room? And I believe it's 69% of men said yes. So actually more men said yes to that than said yes to, would you want to go on a date with me?
Yeah.
Whereas 6% of women said yes. But then the difference got even bigger in the third condition. So the third condition was, do you want to go to bed with me? 75% of men said yes, and 0% of women said yes to that offer. Not only that, but they actually differed in terms of how they, like the manner of their refusal. So the guys were like apologetic and polite about it. They were like, thank you. I'm actually meeting my fiance, or I'm meeting my parents or whatever. But like a lot of them even asked for a rain check.
It was only 75% because they couldn't get away with it.
Exactly. It would have been even higher if they
100% it would have been higher for sure, but especially back in the 1970s. 100%.
1970s, and these were young guys as well. I think it's going to be probably higher among young guys who haven't had much experience and like, this is great, this is a miracle, this might never happen again. Wouldn't be maybe quite such a big deal when you're a bit older and more experienced. But 0% of women said yes, and 0% of women were polite in their refusal. I think they were not apologetic. They didn't ask for a rain check. They were more likely to say, what's wrong with you? Asking that question, or to be frightened in that situation.
Which kind of leads
it's been replicated.
It's been replicated, but which leads to my next one. One of my favorite things to talk about, because I explain this. I do a show on Wednesdays. It's me and another guy, and we have 10 women on the show. It's a panel show that we do. It's a live stream, and I'll explain this concept to women, because you'll have women who'll come to me and be like, "Yo, I'm in a sweatsuit. I go to the store. I have a baseball cap on, and guys still hit on me." And I was like, "Yeah, because they can still tell you're attractive. You don't need to wear, you don't need to have a Hermes bag, wear Louis Vuittons, and wear a tight dress with a Cartier watch for men to find you attractive. Those things don't make them more attractive." And they didn't understand. And the overperception bias, you could explain it was more overperception the more attractive she was. It wasn't even that she winked at him or smiled. And this is the part that's mind blowing to a lot of women.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? The overperception bias, the sexual overperception bias, is a classic example of a failure of cross-sect mind reading, as David Buss calls it. And the idea is basically that a lot of men, they're more likely to overestimate women's sexual interest in them. So they're more likely to think, yeah, awesome, she's really into me, when actually they're wrong about that. And women are less likely to do that, even though it's much more likely that the guy is interested in the woman. And the evolutionary rationale for that is that if you err on the side of thinking that somebody is interested in you, you're less likely to miss a sexual or romantic opportunity. You're more likely to be rejected. You're more likely to have embarrassing situations where you hit on somebody who actually quite obviously isn't interested in you at all. But the currency in evolution isn't the number of embarrassing situations that you avoid. It's the number of offspring that you ultimately have. And
grandchildren making machines.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a reason why males would be selected to err in that direction, so that they don't miss potential opportunities. Because that's not such a big deal at all for women. Because if they miss a sexual opportunity, there are plenty of other sexual opportunities. And in any case, they have a much lower ceiling number of offspring that they can have. And they're probably, even if they miss some sexual opportunities, they are probably going to get close to that ceiling anyway, or would have done prior to the invention of birth control. And also, actually, if women were just constantly thinking, just taking every sexual opportunity, that's going to undermine female choice. Female choices, female choosiness is a very deep-seated part of women's psychology, but also female psychology. Just the fact that women are more choosy about their sexual partners in a short-term context than men are, and males in general are.
But the part that I thought was just so fascinating is that the overperception is more overperceived the more attractive the woman is. Meaning, I remember the study, it's two people studying and you're looking at an image of them studying, and they ask the men, how many of you think that she's interested in him? And ask the women, how many of you think that she's interested in him? Obviously, the men are way more than the women. I think it's like 75%, 25%, something like that. I could be off. But then they put the lipstick on the woman, and then she wears a tight dress or a red dress or something. And now the perception of her being more interested increases. And what I found is that when a woman is just more physically attractive, period, that the things that men do, we have a joke where these Indian men are creeping in the DM saying, I want to see Bob's and vagine, like that kind of thing. You just see that so much more, the more attractive the woman is. It's not even the more promiscuous she is or the more lascivious she looks. It's just more attractive she is, the more misperception that you see. And it's when you explain that to women, I'm like, you didn't do anything wrong. You're just hot. That's why he came on to you like that. It wasn't because of how you dressed. A lot of the red pill guys don't like to hear this. It's not because of how she dressed. It's because you can't get her. It's because she's hotter than anyone you think you can get. And that's why you're shooting your shot.
Yeah, exactly. Even though it's less realistic.
Yes.
With a more attractive than a less attractive woman. So it's funny. It kind of flips what it would be if we were purely rational Spock-like creatures.
Yeah. The other one I love, this is the only time I laughed out loud. The girl sitting next to me was like looking at me on the airplane. I'm reading this on the flight to London. And it was the part where you talk about how men and women derogate each other. So men will often call other men homosexuals. Women will call other women sluts. But throughout history, you've never had a man get into a fight with another man and be like, you've slept with so many women. And I lost it when I read that.
Yeah, that's an insulting thing to say to women.
Some guy shoves me in the gym.
You slept with hundreds and hundreds of women.
You slept with so many women. I hate you. I was like, can someone film this? Can we get this on camera, please? That's pretty funny. What do you think that is? Why is the derogation for men their masculinity? The derogation for women is their sexual pickiness.
Well, this is based on some research that David Bustle and his colleagues did. And the basic idea is that when we derogate same-sex individuals, we often focus on the traits that other sex individuals prefer in a mate. So guys, typically, like neither sex wants a very promiscuous partner, but guys tend to have more of a bee in their bonnet about it than women do. And therefore, if women want to derogate a rival, one good way to do it is to sort of hint at the fact that, actually she's quite promiscuous.
So this is a function of multiple mutual mate choice. Women do this to other women because men don't like it. Men do this to other men because women don't like it.
Exactly. So it goes both ways. Yeah. And when guys try to derogate other guys to try to put women off the other guys, they are more likely to focus on traits that women are particularly interested in a mate. So things like, for instance, your status in the group, your competence. They'll sort of derogate the competence of other men, their wealth, their strength, all those kind of male typical traits that women typically like in a guy. The guy will try to shoot those down in a romantic rival or potential rival, which is quite fascinating. And the whole mutual mate choice thing, actually, I don't think we've discussed that really, but that is fascinating.
You created that. You were the one. Yeah. How does someone? Okay, I'm just out of curiosity. I'm ignorant here. How does a doctor name a thing like that? Like where does that come from? It's a published paper. It gets in a peer reviewed journal. How do you get credited with mutual mate choice?
Myself and my colleague Andrew Thomas, who was my PhD student at the time, we just decided to write this paper. And the basic theme of it is that there's a tendency that we sometimes, in effect, mistake ourselves for peacocks and exaggerate the size of the sex differences in our species. And we try to see ourselves as what we call an MCFC species. So species in which males compete and females choose from among the competing males, which is what, a lot of, probably most mammals are like, and peacocks are like that as well. And we argue that actually we're an MMC species, which is a species with mutual mate choice, where actually both sexes compete for the best mates in their league. Although, men compete harder, but both sexes compete and both sexes are choosy, at least about their long-term mates. Both sexes are choosy because both sexes invest in the young and they need to be choosy. In terms of how you get to name it, we just wrote this paper and we named it, and we just said, we're calling this the MCFC model. We're calling this the MMC or mutual mate choice model. Deal with it, basically.
Yeah.
And then got it published. And it was good. It's one of my favorite papers that I've written. And you've got it published in this journal, Psychological Inquiry, and they got 14 people to comment on it. And then we got to comment on their comments. And and basically we respond to criticisms and alternative proposals.
Well, so it's the rareness of that as a species, the fact that we are one of the few species where women compete with other women in an arena defined by men, and men compete with other men in an arena defined by women. And one of those things looks patriarchal, and the other one seems awesome, depending on what TikTok person you're subscribed to.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there
I find that fascinating. It's just something worth knowing about the human beings, and something quite unique about us. Like you say, it's to understand our evolved psychology. I do think we need to understand the fact that we have this mutual mate choice. Both sexes, we fall in love and we form long-term pair bonds. And if kids come along, both sexes typically invest in them, and that's the reason I think that we evolved this system of mutual mate choice.
One of you wrote in your book, one of a few geniuses that Dr. Buss said he ever met was Robert Trivers. Robert Trivers comes up with a parental investment hypothesis, I believe 1974. And it feels like almost all of these things in sex differences are a derivative of that initial large gamete, small gamete idea, including the concept of hypergamy. I know it's a dirty word that people have a big issue with, but it makes sense. What I do whenever I have a guy who's offended by the concept of hypergamy, I ask him to look at the world through the eyes of his daughter, and then all of a sudden it makes sense. It totally makes sense to him why women should be choosy because of the parental investment that they have to put into their offspring. And I'm just curious, do you think, and this is not something I've ever heard you comment on, but do you think things like social media and dating apps have like maybe exposed mate choice in a way that polite society wasn't ready to see? And what I mean by that is the fact that when, we do GSS surveys, the bottom third of men are having about a third fewer sexual partners. The top 10% of men are having a third more. It seems as if because of a globalized, sexualized marketplace that more women are shifting to at least having, not marrying, but at least having a preference for a smaller few of men.
I think it's doing two things. Dating apps do two things. I think one is they do reveal that aspect of human nature, but I think also they're quite a sort of artificial, evolutionarily novel platform or situation, and I think they actually they amplify that aspect of human nature as well. So I think that they give women an sort of evolutionarily unprecedented scope to engage in that kind of behavior where all the focus is on a relatively small number of guys. And a big part of that is just the fact that within that platform, you see tons and tons of people. The main thing you see about them is their physical attractiveness.
Yes.
There's little else to evaluate them on. And so everyone's attention is going to go to the few. You're not seeing that, lots of other women are doing the same thing. And therefore that your odds of having any kind of serious relationship with that person are pretty slim. So I think throughout most of human evolutionary history, women they were choosier than men, especially just in early courtship and for low cost sexual relationships, they were choosier than men. And that kind of meant that basically some men will get more sexual interest than others. Now you get the reverse as well. So women get more sexual interest, but it's just somewhat stronger with women being attracted to men. And it matters more as well because women are choosier. But that has been skewed now. It's on those platforms at least. In real life, I think the difference is
it's definitely not as much. I think people like lose their mind when we bring up dating app statistics. Obviously that is not a corollary for the actual world, but it does show a vector. That's what I'm saying. It just shows a direction that I'm saying. I agree. It's not hypohomogamy. I forgot what it was called. Clearly women at a certain rate want men who are above that level, whatever it is. I don't mean to judge people by their physical attractiveness. I'm just saying, if we were to stratify 10 million male accounts, 10 million female accounts, the median woman is not interested in the median man. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
And in doing so, people lose their mind. They get very upset about it. One of the things, have you seen the Lucy Hunt 2015 study, which goes over physical attractiveness of two partners, and then a given time, how the relation of physical attractiveness to basically two people meet? What is the correlation of physical attractiveness at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, et cetera? Have you seen that study?
I don't think I have. That's interesting though. What's the finding?
So at 1 month, the correlation was 0.72. So physical attractiveness.
Very high. Yeah.
At about 4 months, it was cut in half. At 9 months, it was statistically insignificant from 0.
Is that right? That's really rather interesting. Wow.
So I'm just kind of this is the whole crux of what I teach, which is basically in a short-term context, or what I call an unfamiliar environment, like dating apps, cold approach, nightclubs, stuff like that. You're right. More physically attractive men are going to do well. In an environment where she gets to know you, what I like to say is I put women in the friend zone. She's in my social circle for an amount of time. She gets to see me with other women, interact with other people, lead groups, show levels of competency, relevancy, charisma, and humor. In that case, now I'm a guy who's a 5, just stratified as a 5, and I'm dating a girl who's a 10 because the correlation of physical attractiveness at 9 months was 0. I don't think it takes 9 months. I think it's something you can do in 1 month or 2 months from seeing that. But I'm just curious if you've ever had any, I guess the question I had was, the things that take over in the familiar environment are things like charisma and humor.
Yeah.
Right. What is the evolutionary reason for women being attracted to humor, charisma? We already went over mate choice copying, things like that, and social proof. What is the evolutionary reason for women being attracted to those things? And how can those things overcome just physical attractiveness?
Yeah, interesting. With humor and charisma, it's a little trickier. So I guess the evolutionary advantage of being attracted to traits like competence and status and resource accrual ability, that's all pretty clear, right? That's a good trait in a partner, especially if it's somebody that you're going to be having kids with. You want somebody who can bring in resources and the like. But yes, it is a lot less clear why women like traits like humor. But I think probably the most popular and best explanation that I've heard comes from Jeffrey Miller. And he argues that humor is a sign of creative intelligence.
Yeah.
If you can successfully create humor, you're creative, you're intelligent, you have social acumen as well. And all of those things, they're kind of useful in themselves, but he argues that they're also fitness indicators. So it's actually quite hard to grow a brain that is capable of those kind of feats of creative intelligence. And any individual who can do it obviously has good genes, they're a healthy individual, they've developed well. And so it's therefore like a human equivalent of the peacock's tail. Likewise with music and artistic ability and various other traits that had no real kind of obvious evolutionary advantage to them. They're just fitness indicators, and they're just indicators that, this is an individual who's developed well and has good genes, the kind of genes that actually that I might want to mix with my own genes in the form of creating offspring.
Well, you also want to be more socially aligned with funnier people. I just think funny people are like, and I think you would have access, I'm thinking ancestrally, 20,000 years ago, and I'm a woman and I get to choose who my partner is to some extent. And one of the guys I'm choosing from, all the other people like being around him, especially the other high status males. And realistically, and here's the funny thing is, of all the techniques I try to teach my clients, nothing's harder than humor, but nothing's more powerful than humor. Like nothing, there's nothing you can do where the physically unattractive dude can humor his way into the most beautiful women. Absolutely. I don't know. Some people don't believe me. Some of the black pill guys don't believe me. It's absolutely totally true. It's about also the charismatic guy who tells the story around the campfire, tells the story while everyone's having drinks and everyone becomes quiet and starts listening to this guy. It's very attractive to it. And I ask myself, like I do all the time, I know I'm a really weird person for doing this, but every time I see something like that, my first question is, what ancestral problem does this solve? And the answer I come up with is, this guy has more social alignments. When shit hits the fan, he's going to be on the winning team because more people want to associate and align with him. And so that's why I suspect humor and charisma are so attractive to women.
Yeah. Interesting. because people do like being around funny people because they're fun, right?
Yeah.
But I guess part of the question is like, why did we evolve to be the kind of animal that finds things funny, and why do we
So do
find it fun?
chimpanzees. Chimpanzees
Yeah.
do as well. So whatever that proclivity is, it become, what is it, 6 million years ago, where primates and hominids separate.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that, before that, chimps and Homo sapiens developed the ability to laugh at things that were funny. And chimps in human society laugh at things that humans would also find funny. Someone tripping and falling, etc. We've seen this. So something in our evolutionary past as mammals, as vertebrates, caused us to find these things funny.
I think actually all the great apes laugh. So I think it actually goes even further than 6 million years ago. I think, even orangutans, who are the most distantly related to the existing apes, I think they laugh as well. They all laugh when they're tickled. That's one big thing. And parents often will tickle the little ones, and they will do their ape version of laughter. Yeah. It's a funny phenomenon, isn't it? That's partly cultural as well. I guess with humor, I guess people in all cultures joke around and they all laugh. But I think maybe in our wealthy cultures, our frictionless cultures, we've just got more scope to develop humor and develop the culture around humor. And I think we're probably better at evoking laughter in other people than we used to be, just because we've developed the tools to do it, and we share them. And
we got Netflix specials.
The funniest people. Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly what I was going to say is that the very funniest people in the world, the atypically funny people that most of our ancestors will never meet, that people that funny, everybody sees them. Millions of people see them.
I've always wanted to ask an evolutionary psychologist this question, and also hopefully I get to ask Joe Heinrich this question, because the evolutionary biologist. There's this funny passage I saw from anthropologists that's like, the Neanderthals go out of existence 27,000 years ago, and then hominids are the only species left on the planet, and we don't know why. And I'm like, you don't know why? Isn't it? Why do you think Neanderthals go out of existence and then Homo sapiens are the only mammals on the planet 27,000 years ago?
I don't actually have a strong view on that. I'm not too sure. I think that it is quite plausible what you suggested, that we outcompeted and killed and ate them.
And bred them.
But I'm not actually 100% sure. Yeah, exactly.
I just like to look
I guess
at World
by
War
definition,
I.
we did outcompete.
I look at World War I and World War II, and I'm like, I think I know what happened to the Neanderthals.
I think that's plausible. I do think it's plausible that's what happened. I'm just not 100% sure.
Yeah.
The most annoying answer that a scientist can give.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. Going into the whole falsifiability thing, there was one other one. It was the belief that, so it was dual mating strategy versus mate switching that Dr. Buss has switched his position on. But the other one was the idea that it was going to be men of lower socioeconomic class that were going to be more likely to commit sexual assault. It turns out that that wasn't true. And the evolutionary psychology called its own foul on that.
Yeah, we did. We found that it was the opposite is the case. That actually higher status men who are more attracted to women actually have a somewhat greater tendency to commit sexual assault or maybe even engage in rape.
Maybe it's more overperception. Maybe that's where it comes from. It's their own perception of themselves.
Yeah, because they generally attract women, and then they therefore overgeneralize and just think, all women are, and this woman is just as attracted to me as those other women who definitely were. And I guess maybe it could also be that maybe sort of high testosterone guys, hypermasculine guys are more attractive, but they're maybe also more likely to have some of the more undesirable traits and the aggressiveness and
they're missing the details. They're missing the social cues because of the overperception. I could definitely say that. Yeah. But in that idea, by the way, I don't know if it was you or Rob Henderson, the one article about people pretending or willingness to show more progressive ideals to get along better on college universities. Was that you who posted that?
I did, I think on my Substack. Nature Substack. I posted that.
You talk about that a lot, and we haven't really got into the whole wokeness thing of it because we're talking about the sex differences here. But what is your overall belief on that? And I would highly recommend you read The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, because it has a very clear hypothetical hypothesis on why exactly that's happening, and I can't argue against it.
I think, yeah, that book I have read. I haven't read
Yeah.
his more recent one, but that book I've read, and I also recommend it. I think it's great. Yeah. So on wokeness, I think people have the impression sometimes that just almost all students on campus and almost all professors and lecturers hold woke beliefs. And it sometimes seems like that. And I think sometimes students feel that way, and professors feel that way. Um, but what seems to happen when you give people anonymous questionnaires is that you find that actually quite a small number of people hold the more extreme woke views, but a lot of people are just unwilling to
Fight them.
to argue against them and to
Yeah.
fight them. And quite a few, especially students, and I think something like, I think it was a number like 70%, wasn't it? Where students will actually fake those views. They will express those views even though they are suspicious of them and don't really believe them, at least in their extreme forms, just because just it just has such a stranglehold at the moment on the culture that they just feel that they have to. They're probably right, that they feel that they have to fake them or they could get into trouble, that they need to fit in.
I
It's really
have,
unfortunate.
I don't want to get them in trouble. There's two Ivy League faculty members that are currently in my program, and I can't say their name. Like I can't. I even had one of them come on my show, and I had to mask his voice because because while he's
Right.
still in the academic apparatus, he doesn't want to talk about it. My head coach on my team, one of my main coaches, he graduated from Harvard 2 Mays ago. And he was like, the day he's like, they can't take my degree away. So as soon as he
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
graduated, he started posting everything he believed on Twitter because he was just as afraid as what you're talking about. But I will tell you guys one thing that blew my mind. I go to Harvard and I'm sitting down there at the graduation ceremony. This was last May, but the May before that, I'm sitting there and I open up the brochure about why you should send your children to Harvard. It was just basically for all the parents, the younger children, send them to Harvard, whatever. And in the brochure, on my life, it said this. It showed a graph of the amount of people that identified as homosexual when they went into Harvard. And then they showed the amount on the same page, the amount of people that identified as homosexual when they graduated from Harvard. And they showed that the number had increased. And as a selling point to go to Harvard, we will make your children more likely to be gay. I'm not even saying that it's true. I'm saying that is how they were selling it in that brochure. Call me out. You guys can look it up yourself. It was one of the wildest things I've ever seen. The second thing I saw that blew my mind was there's a divinity school. In fact, that's what Harvard used to be, is a divinity school. You go to the divinity school and every single member of the divinity school had a rainbow LBGT flag on. And the classroom, the names of the classes at the divinity school were Queer the Congregation. And there were several courses. Like it seemed like the entire purpose of the divinity school was to get into organized religion and sit there and I don't know what they were trying to do. But I was like, I'm not aware of that's how the divinity school was designed to work. But it was,
Yeah.
and I'm not offended by it in the slightest. My point is that to me was like a level of wokeness I could not believe. And then I was warned when I went on campus and I was making YouTube videos, like they may kick me off. That's all I'm saying. So I will tell you that I've seen absolutely what you're saying to be the case. And I will also tell you that of the two faculty members, and I probably have 5 Harvard alum additional to that are in my program, all of them say the same thing. They're like, even these guys are even Democrats, and they're like, I'm woke, but I'm not that woke. That place is, I'm afraid to express myself in that arena.
Which is just terrible. It's the exact opposite of how universities should be, because it's supposed to be a place where you're generating knowledge and finding true beliefs about the world. And you can only do that if you can disagree. Again, so it's really a shame. And I think it's just very, very important because people think that almost everybody else holds these views. I think it's very important to try to puncture that belief by reporting these anonymous questionnaire results and say, well, look, actually, you thought it was just you. Actually, it's a large number, maybe even a majority of people who have exactly the same thoughts. And you're kind of being held hostage by your own beliefs about the ubiquity of these views, and also by the loud majority that are kind of trying to intimidate people and are successfully intimidating people.
One of the things that I really respect when I see someone like Jonathan Haidt, or I see someone like Scott Galloway, or I see someone like Richard Reeves, who are politically progressive. I'm assuming Jonathan Haidt is just because he does a show with Scott Galloway. What the fact that they're willing to talk about things like sex differences and like a high level of cancel culture and wokeness, that's not their audience. Their audience does not want to hear them talk about this. I think it's very brave for William Costello to go in front of Parliament and try to express the fact that there is not this incel crisis where there's hundreds of thousands of incels murdering people like depicted on the show Adolescence. And he goes in, again, this is he's an Irish citizen, graduated University of Texas at Austin. And then he goes in front of Parliament and says that. And I thought it was very brave, especially because the grant money he got to do that incel study was from a counter extremism organization.
Yeah.
They didn't not to put words in their mouth. I don't think that was the result they were looking for. The title of his paper is "Why Isn't There More Incel Violence?" I have so much respect for people who are academically honest when it doesn't suit them. When it doesn't suit them. Richard Reeves making a book about boys and men. I promise you, a lot of his friends were like, "Why are you doing this? This is men don't suffer." And if the two things that I hear, number one is men don't suffer. Then you show them the data and you're like, okay, all right, men do suffer, but they should suffer because of 3,000 years of patriarchy. And I'm like, that's your answer? That's where we're going. How is that productive? How is it productive to leave a third of men sexless? Like, how do we win as society there? Because every time we look at this in history, things end badly.
Totally. And that's like wanting to punish a certain group of men for things that other men did in the past, which is thinking in terms of groups and group guilt rather than individuals and individual responsibility. Yeah, I admire all those folks as well. And I think it's great that they've been so brave about the things they've been talking about. And I do think, though, that really it's the only way to make an academic contribution is to be a bit brave, and there may be some unpleasantness in the short term. But long term, you got to say something. You got to say what you think is true, and you're not going to make a splash or make any kind of innovation if you just go along with what everybody else is saying, especially when it's pretty obvious that what they're saying is misguided.
Yeah. And also, I think an ability to debate and have discussions with people who disagree with you. I think we're losing that drastically. And I think the social media algorithm is putting people on your platform or exposing you to people who agree with you. We did we had an election night for the Trump Harris campaign. I went on my IG. I have 200,000 followers, and I was like, "Hey, can I get some? I would like some women who are politically progressives, Harris supporters. Can you come on? Anybody, crickets, anybody. Can anyone come on?" I couldn't find a single person, and then I talked to my friend who's politically progressive, and he's like, "Yeah, all the women I know support Kamala Harris." And I was like, wait, what's going on here? And then I realized, the algorithm has completely put me in this box and I can't get out of it, which is why I try to follow content creators who don't agree with me politically, and that to try to open up, because the algorithm will put you in a box, which will cause, again, these extreme sex differences. The discussion about the sex differences now becomes polarized because we're not willing to have this conversation. Why? Because the social media algorithm is designed to make us more enraged, to keep us on the platform, which is why I'm so happy. Like, I think Chris Williamson, very politically moderate. I'm very happy he's in the top 10 podcasts in the world for somebody who's platforming evolutionary psychologists. He's the first guy to do this, which is really, really terrific. And so, like, seeing stuff like that is Alex Huberman's another one, Lex Friedman, that is really, really encouraging that people like that are getting that much pull. Anyway, go ahead.
It really is. It really is. It's great, isn't it? I think it's great that he is a moderate guy and he's a responsible guy. He's not saying extreme stuff. And yet it's one of the most watched podcasts in the world. It's great.
So just to go along the falsifiability thing, what is the strongest argument that you see against your own position?
Let me think. Okay. Well, I think probably my favorite argument for the idea that you could have these sex differences you could have psychological sex differences without there being an innate psychological contribution comes from Alice Eagley and Wendy Wood. And they have an idea called social role theory. And the idea is that psychological sex differences follow from the way that we treat men and women, but we treat men and women in different ways in every single society, the same ways, same sex differences in how we treat them, because of innate physical differences. So the innate psychological, there are no innate psychological differences or minimal innate psychological differences. The psychological differences follow from the innate physical differences. So men are larger and stronger than women. And for that reason, they are funneled into any roles that involve aggression, for instance, and other areas where you need strength. And because they're funneled into those roles, that is the roles that increase the average levels of aggression among men and women.
Yes.
Women are the ones that get pregnant. Women are the ones that nurse the young. And therefore, it makes sense for society to funnel women into roles involving childcare. especially of the young, but just in general. And then that is what creates the psychological sex difference in terms of parental inclinations. So I think that's a strong argument and a good argument, and just one worth taking seriously. I ultimately don't think that it wins. It doesn't explain the very, very early onset of the aggression sex difference and the parental sex difference. It doesn't explain the fact that you find the same sex differences in other species that don't have social roles and socially, culturally created roles. But yes, I do think that's a strong argument. And I think, I guess another one would be that some of the research on hormonal sex differences isn't as strong as it could be, because it's quite hard to do that research. So we should, with all the hormone studies, the prenatal testosterone studies, we should hold them somewhat tentatively. We say, okay, I think the evidence is pointing in this direction, but I'm not 100% sure of that or anything else.
If you could compress the entire book into like one phrase that made conservatives and liberals, traditionalists and progressives, manosphere and feminists, made them all uncomfortable, what would it be?
I would say that sex differences matter and sex differences are real, but they're not huge and in the way that traditionalists think, and they're not tiny or non-existent in the way that progressives think. But the best way to make the world a better place, this is a very long sentence, the best way to make the world a better place is to have an accurate view of those sex differences, full stop.
Incredible.
Paragraph length
that was
sentence
perfect
for you.
If you could delete one false belief about sex differences from every university psychology department, what would it be?
I think it would have to be the idea that sex differences are largely a part of the socio-cultural forces. And I would delete that one because I think that's the one that you find in university courses. So there are people the traditionalists make the opposite mistake, but you don't typically find them represented in universities. So I'd have to get rid of the opposite mistake, the denial of innate sex differences mistake.
This is kind of off scripture, but I was curious. When Perplexity started scraping YouTube transcripts and Gemini started scraping YouTube transcripts, I used to do 20, 30 hours of study for every one of my interviews. I can do that in a fraction of the time. I had Hermes go and watch every single one of your interviews and give me some. I watched 4 of them on my own at triple speed, but then I actually had Hermes go through and transcribe like I'm like 10 maybe of your interviews, both Chris Williamson ones, and I'm talking this took maybe 4 minutes for me to do. And I'm just curious, my ability to find peer-reviewed data to support my points has become incredibly easy. Do you see the positive and the negative coming up? And is artificial intelligence something you use in your work? And do you see it impossible? The way I want to use it is a tool to steel man my ideas and to find data that proves or disprove what it is that I believe.
Yeah, I do use it. I find it very useful for doing research and for fact checking and so on. Hermes, I hadn't heard of. Hermes, I'm going to look into. That's really cool.
As far as agentics are concerned, Hermes is number one. Yeah. So if you go on Open Router and you see which Open Router uses the most, Hermes is more than almost all of them combined. So Hermes is number one. And then if you go down a little bit, you're going to see Claude Cowork is like kind of next. OpenClaw is down there below Hermes. Hermes, it's terrifying, Steve. I've asked it to do stuff and it's never told me no. It not one time. So the brain is ChatGPT 5.5 Codex. You just pay $20 a month for that. But if you want to pay more, you can. And so what Hermes, what makes it so incredible, and I know the audience is probably like, what is he talking about here? I can make ChatGPT 5.5 be the brain. And I say, hey, when you look at video, because ChatGPT cannot look at video, it can only look at spots. You say, I need you to task Gemini to look at the video. Well, Gemini is good at that. Google owns YouTube. I need to get a bunch of computational work done at a cheap rate. I need you to use DeepSeek version 4 Pro to do that. So the main brain is ChatGPT 5.5. Now I need you to wordsmith my debate prep before this thing's coming up. I need you to use Claude Sonnet. Don't use Opus. It's way too expensive. And do not use Fable. It's way too expensive. I need you to use Claude Sonnet to wordsmith my final argument that I'm going to use for this. And so ChatGPT does all and it just tasks all these other AI models to do different stuff. It's incredible. And you do it on Discord.
Wow.
So instead of project and thread, it's channel and thread. If you want, dude, I'll show you how to do it. It's really easy. I set the whole thing up using ChatGPT. I just took screenshots and it, you need a second machine to operate it. It's not, you can't operate it.
Gotcha.
The other one is Manus. I don't know if you use Manus. Manus is the easiest one to use because it works completely on the cloud, totally on your phone, and it integrates with Meta. It's really good.
Awesome. That's all completely amazing.
Yeah.
I love this stuff. And I think, it's so useful. I think one thing that AI is very useful for is escaping that kind of the bubble that you're talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Because I think because it averages over all human knowledge, I think it can give you more balanced answers to your questions than you're likely to get with social media.
You can go in voice mode and tell me why I'm wrong. That's what I do. I have I have a debate with a men's rights activist in 2 days, and this guy is like just a hateful misogynist. And I know it's funny, people think me saying this. This dude's a hateful misogynist who says horrible things about people, and I have to debate him. And so I have Hermes give me 15, go through his last 30 videos, give me summaries of all of them, and then after you do so, then tell me why I'm wrong on every single one of my points, and then I have to argue my way back to the top. And by the way, Claude is probably best for steel manning your arguments. ChatGPT is also very good for this. And so that's what I do for debate prep. And it's just been what used to take me at minimum 10 hours per interview. Now I can do it in a couple hours. It's really, really good stuff.
That's amazing. That is amazing. And that's the real advantage of this stuff, I think, is that you can ask, tell me why I'm wrong. Like, what are the faults in this argument? This is what I think. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
And I guess the danger, though, is that you could just say, am I right? Just make my argument stronger rather than tell me where I might be going wrong.
Yes.
If you see what I mean. So you could potentially, I'm sure you probably could use it to try to insulate yourself from criticism.
You fight your way up the mountain is the way I think of it.
Yeah.
I start off and I tell so you know how in projects it has the instruction. My instruction is I'm a professional debater. If you agree with me, if you're sycophantic, or if you just agree with me without challenging my ideas, you're going to get me embarrassed on YouTube in front of thousands of people. It is your job to steel man so I program it. I give it a prompt, basically telling me, if you agree with me at all, you're going to humiliate me. And then it's like, okay, you'll find that the conversations are very challenging, which is what I'm looking for. That's really what I'm looking for in those type of situations.
That's great. I did something similar. I had an interview with a journalist a while ago, and I was told like an hour before that he was actually hyper progressive. I hadn't realized that. And I thought, I better prep. So I went to GPT and I was saying, what are some of the criticisms that he might unleash? What are good ways to respond? And it was a pretty good response. I think I could figure out better responses than it gave me. But the thing is, it just got me thinking along the lines of what possible criticisms might come up.
It's just there to fill in the gaps. It can't be the captain of the ship. It's there to give you, like, to fill in the gaps. Because there were things I knew what I wanted to talk to you about today, but there were things like, oh man, I forgot about this, this, and this. So it's there to fill in the gaps, which makes it really, really awesome for you to be able to do that. But just here's the main thing where I would do that was a little different. ChatGPT is not an agentic, so it can't watch Instagram videos, TikTok videos, or YouTube videos. Whereas Manus, Hermes, OpenClaw, Claude Cowork can physically watch those videos. And because it can watch the videos, now I can extract transcripts and I can come up with arguments and counter arguments very quickly. That's why I would recommend an agentic versus just doing ChatGPT.
Yeah, and Hermes, you reckon, is the best one, eh?
Hermes is it's also the hardest one to set up. The easiest one is Manus. I see. Hermes is, you need a separate machine. It's going to be about 2 hours to set it up.
I see. Okay. But Manus is the easiest.
Yeah.
Manus is pretty good.
Manus is only it's totally on your phone. It's owned by a company in Shanghai, or from Shanghai. They're actually in Singapore, I think, is where the company's based. Okay. And it's partnered with Meta. So if you want to do Instagram stuff, it's definitely the best. So we know, awesome. And I'm glad, because I was very curious. I have a conversation with a divorce attorney coming up, and I actually want to know how AI is reducing the amount that his paralegals do. It's like the entire law profession is about to just be completely changed. And I don't know how accounting even exists in 5 years. I think it might be completely gone in 5 years. I think you having a personal brand, being an author, those kind of things, I think they will stick around. I think being a litigator is going to stick around, but there's certain jobs where I'm like, yo, there's no way this is going to happen. I just don't even see how there's any possibility. Hey, this has been the best. Steve, if you're ever in Las Vegas, I will take care of you.
Yeah.
Please just come to Vegas. I promise you. There's a ton of places that would love to interview you as well. I know you were just here in Austin. That's my hometown. I'm a Longhorn. That's actually how I got the Dr. Buss interview in the first place. He wasn't doing a ton of interviews, but we're both Longhorns. And same thing with William. And also, if you're ever obviously in Las Vegas, and if you have any questions about AI, please hit me up. And my team, these guys are on it. These guys are definitely on it.
That's great. I definitely will. That is all loaded, cool, and fascinating.
Lastly,
this was a great conversation, man. I really loved it.
That, man.
And
I try to do a lot of work on this. Lastly, this is something I told Dr. Buss. He's the theoretical physicist and I'm the experimental physicist. A lot of the things that you guys talk about, you guys just watch my IG. A lot of those things are actually happening in the real world. Like I said, I host beauty pageants and it's really, really interesting, like how those things work out. Women will win one of my beauty pageants and the likelihood of them being married is astronomically high by the next year. Crazy. Well, I'll have girls who finish in my top 10 next year. They're almost always married. It's one of the wildest things because they're on stage showing maximal fertility. Again, it's impossible for me to explain this to other people. People who understand evolutionary psychology, they totally understand where this is coming from. And also,
rich husbands by any chance?
Huh?
Rich husbands typically, I'm going to guess.
Sometimes they don't have to be rich. I think they have to have. So this is the way I try to explain it. For women, physical attractiveness means very much in the beginning. It doesn't mean everything. Obviously, if a woman has enough red flags, you don't want to have kids with her, but physical attractiveness will definitely get her noticed. Meaning there's like kind of one play she can run. For men, there's so many plays they can run. I've seen men humor their way into women outside their league and money their way outside of their league. And I've also seen them competency. I've seen them stand on stage and give a speech and get women out of their league. I've seen them social proof their way to women out of their league. And for me specifically, I've mate choice copied my way into women out of my league. So what I'm saying is, I think we delineate it too much to height, looks, and money. And I think there are, David Buss and Cindy Maston put it best, 276 reasons why women have sex with men and why women have sex. And I have found that the variety of plays that you can run as a man is astronomically higher than the variety of plays that you can run as a woman. For a woman, it's very difficult if a man's not physically attracted to you for you to talk your way into that. So I think that's probably one of the biggest differences I've seen. But
interesting. That's great.
This is great, man. I appreciate that the conversation. This was awesome. Come on again anytime you want. If there's anything you want to promote, please let me know. And like I said before, guys, this is required reading. Two things I want to say. Number one, I have 6 rules in the Men of Action program. Rule number 2 is evolutionary psychology describes all human behavior. And number 2, I want you guys to go get this book. This is now the latest book that is on my required book reading for the Men of Action program, along with Sextinction and the Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was, like I said, it was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that.
Awesome.
And, have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Contact me anytime you need anything, brother.
We'll do, man. Take it easy.
Take care.